Hello. Welcome to my channel Touching Stories. You're about to hear an amazing story about love and unexpected decisions. Enjoy watching.
Once upon a time, now it seems in a past life, Angelica watched a movie about the afterlife. In it, scientists with serious faces argued about how visions on the edge of life and death can be explained from a rational point of view, and people who happened to experience such an experience inspiringly shared their experiences. Many spoke of a dark tunnel and a tantalizing selenium ahead. In front of many also flashed scenes of the past as if showing the cut from a movie. And when Angelica herself was on the threshold, a step away from death, she wondered where the gloomy corridor and memories were. She even looked around, as if it might be somewhere nearby. But instead, all she saw was a field, and what a field it was! The grasses were waist-high, lush and fragrant, mixed with flowers, as if someone had embroidered green silk with semi-precious stones. The sun was blazing, her throat was dry, and her lips seemed as if they would fall with sand if she didn't take at least one sip. Angelica stood on the bank of the wide river, and its refreshing waves gently licked her bare feet. "This is her mother," soothed. That gasp the girl realized that she was dressed in a sky-blue sundress, exactly the same as she wore on her 16th birthday. "Mommy." Tears came to my eyes, and I felt so bitter that even the sky darkened and blue clouds covered the horizon. They were rapidly approaching, as if driven by a storm, but around the meadow, as far as the eye could see, not a single hedge. Angelica sat down and folded her palms in a bucket, reached for the water. Now she'll drink? No. A sharp shout made her shudder, and water spilled from her hands in glittering drops. Turning around, Angelica saw her mother, in a light chintz dress, hair curled coarsely. Mommy looked exactly as she was depicted in her youth on Angelica's favorite photo card. Mommy was strong and blooming, just like this meadow around. Angelica smiled. How good it was to see her like this. "Don't drink." Mommy didn't smile and threatened her daughter with her finger. "What are you doing here? You can't be here. It's not time yet." "Why not?" Angelica asked in confusion. For some reason, she could not remember what had happened before she found herself in this meadow. It seems that there, in this early, was very painful and scary. In general, it was not worth remembering. Angelica loved it here in the meadow. She didn't mind to stay here forever. "No way." Her mother put her hands to her sides and suddenly, firmly grasping her daughter under the elbow, dragged her away from the river along the barely visible path. "It's too early for you. You have to leave quickly," mumbled her mother, and Angelica followed her and understood nothing at all. She didn't want to go anywhere, but suddenly a wooden old door appeared in the middle of the field. Just a door, nothing else. "Mommy, I want to stay. Don't take me back." Angelica panicked. She struggled, but her mother was unexpectedly strong. "No, I want to come back to you. Don't take me back. It's bad there." Mom's face contorted with sadness and then infinite love. "I know, daughter, but everything has its time. Your time to live is now." With that, Mom opened the door. It was cold and dark. She pushed Angelica hard, pressed on her shoulders, and the girl with a piercing scream toppled into this icy and somehow rumbling, like a rushing train, darkness. "Archie, she's awake." "Well, at last. Right? Our vitals. Excellent. We're finally pumped. So, quiet. So what if she's out of the ICU? We don't know how much brain damage was done." The voices belonged to one woman and two men, and all the fuss they made around Angelica was tiring her. She was much better. Where is it? The vision of the meadow by the river melted rapidly, like a morning fog, and Angelica remembered, understood. Her body was pierced by such pain that she cried out, tried to flounder desperately, but there was no strength. She opened her eyes and immediately clenched them shut, groaning, the room spinning upside down. "Angelica, can you talk? It's okay. Calm down, please. You're safe." She was still opening and closing her eyes, turning her head, feeling the softness of the pillow. Gradually, the room stopped spinning and shaking. Gradually, the world became familiar. Angelica realized that she was in a hospital. Sensors beeped, wires stretched to her arms. Bandages on her arms, and below the waist, what seemed like thousands of snakes stinging. I think she complained out loud about that last one. There were two doctors and a nurse at her bedside. They all looked anxious, but also cheerful. They spoke one by one, explaining that her life was in no danger, that she was saved. And the boy, Angelique would have jumped up on the bed if she had more strength. "The child is fine," answered the older man with the gray beard. "His father's been found. Everything's fine. Archie took care of you," the nurse said hurriedly as Angelica reached up to touch her face. "There were no bandages on it. You're very lucky your face wasn't hurt." "What?" The nurse glanced resentfully at her colleague who had elbowed her. "It's very important for women." That day, Angelica, having passed the last exam brilliantly and already anticipating how soon she would graduate from the university with a diploma of landscape designer, was returning home. She was a little late because together with her classmates went to a cafe. Naturally, Angelica didn't forget to call Barry to tell them that she couldn't visit his parents today. But in principle, she didn't think it was so bad that they had visited them only yesterday. Barry, being a fiancé, didn't like it when she changed her plans, but he took it normally because he had sworn his love to her. Angelica decided to take a shortcut through the city park. This place meant a lot to her while her parents were alive. They used to walk here with the whole family. The park had a rectangular shape, but in one place it seemed to branch off a small section, something like an alley. Angelica knew that once there was a private house with a lush garden, and here, in fact, this section was its remains. Trees and shrubs had grown here. Everything was wild, abandoned. In the back of the plot stood a house, or rather, its remains, a fragile wooden structure, which was to be demolished from one day to the next. Angelica walked by and suddenly stopped. Something was wrong here. The girl suddenly smelled smoke. Squinting her eyes, she looked at the house. Was it just a show or? No, it was. Tongues of flame looked out of the first floor window. The house was on fire. Angelica quickly pulled out of her purse a phone and called the fire department. Meanwhile, the fire, judging by the characteristic odor and appeared outward clouds of smoke, rampant evil, greedily devouring the dry wood. "Wow!" exclaimed a passerby who stopped next to Angelica. "Firemen should be called." "I already have," Angelica replied. She couldn't understand what else was bothering her so much, besides the fire that threatened the park area. The road with the rushing cars was very close by, so it was hard to understand what was the matter. "I've read that in fires." "Quiet," Angelica interrupted the passerby. "Do you hear?" "What?" The man rounded his eyes. "I don't hear anything." There's a child." Angelica now clearly recognized the call for help. And indeed, look. The passerby stretched out his hand, pointing to one of the windows of the second floor, in which a tiny silhouette flashed and disappeared. A crowd began to gather around. People were talking, wondering when the fire department would get here, and some were already filming what was happening on their phones. "There's a man, it seems," said some grandfather standing with his grandmother. "We need help." "Where?" The old lady stopped him. "Can't you see it's collapsing? Firemen will come and save everyone. That's their job." "Do something," Angelica exclaimed. She looked around helplessly. Can't anyone help?" She could understand people. The flames and smoke looked creepy. But she also couldn't just stand there and stare, realizing that there was a baby inside the house. "Girl, where are you going? You're crazy, right? You're going to burn. Stop, you idiot." She was shouted at, but Angelica didn't listen. She tore her scarf from her neck and wrapped it around her face and rushed to the door of the house. "Baby, where are you?" Screaming in a room where she could hardly see anything because of the smoke was a bad idea. But Angelica thought of only one thing. She had to find the baby. She thought the scream came from somewhere up ahead and up, a staircase. The girl rushed down it and the steps creaked threateningly. A corridor, many doors. Which one is it? Angelica swung open the first one at random, and she saw the boy standing with his hands pressed against the stab window. "Baby, I'm here." The girl rushed at him and pulled off her scarf, threw it over the child's head. "Get down." Like lightning came the thought. It seems it is necessary to keep closer to the floor. There is more clean air. Angelica begged herself not to think of the worst, that they will not be in time. She heard from the street came the howling sirens of fire engines, which meant, come on. She hoarsely encouraged the child and coughed hoarsely. How did the kid of 5 years old find himself here? Where are his parents? However, all thoughts that can distract from survival here and now away. Again the stairs. This time the steps did not creak. They just fell under the feet of those who were walking. Angelica, shrieking, pushed the boy forward down to where the exit from the house, freedom, life itself was already visible. Run, she shouted and struggled to get out of the trap. Legs from below as if dipped in lava, and Angelica realized with horror that it seems that the fire started in the house in several places at once, including the basement. The strength left the girl as suddenly as if someone unknown turned a lever in her to the off position. Angelica felt that the air scalding, poisoned by burning, penetrated into her lungs, filled them. Her head suddenly became so impossibly light. And then she slipped into blessed darkness. Then there was a flood meadow by the river Mom. And then welcome to reality, where there was so much pain. After the doctor's visit, Angelica soon fell asleep. This time without any visions or dreams, she just rested, her body restoring its resources. When she woke up again, she found the doctor beside her, the same one from the previous trio, the younger one. He said that Angelica's overall health was not as bad as it could be. What was the truth? She asked. The girl had already realized that her head, her arms, her hands, the upper half of her body in general, were lucky they'd been damaged by the fire. But things really weren't all that bad. I mean, it was scary, but it paled in comparison to what was wrong with her legs. Not only were they completely covered in bandages, but they also felt strange. In general, it was as if there was no pain at all. The body was very good at taking the appropriate drugs. But just this part of the body felt. It felt so that Angelica assumed that when the effect of the drugs would weaken, everything would be just awful. She also remembered how she had fallen into a scorcher, remembered how the cutting pain from the sharp boards made her scream like a wounded animal caught in a trap. The doctor mumbled something about her general condition. Then he looked almost guiltily, maybe because Angelica thought that they could not save her completely, and he told the truth. That her legs, as well as her thighs, were all very badly damaged. The extent of the burns and the nature of the injuries that complemented them all meant only one thing. Treatment would be long and expensive, after which another period of rehabilitation would be required. Unfortunately, there would be scars left behind, the doctor finished. Plastic surgery can correct the situation somewhat, but you just don't worry. The main thing is that you are alive. Angelica nodded. She was not a doctor, but she understood something in life, and for some reason the realization that it seems with her now will remain forever bodily disfigurement, it was taken calmly. It was even creepy, because at the same time Angelica thought about the fact that it comes out she will no longer be able to wear shorts in the summer, short skirts and dresses, and on the beach? No way. Could this be the way things would turn around in an instant? My family, the girl suddenly exclaimed. It was another strange thing that until now Angelica had been immersed only in her own worries. And now she thought that her relatives must have long ago rushed to look for her and worried. There was a foam in your purse, the doctor smiled, and in it was an address book. Your family has already been contacted and they know what happened to you. Angelica felt two feelings, relief and confusion, because where's everyone? Not that she thought that near her bed should stand frightened loved ones with flowers and bags of oranges, but it had been hours since she came to her senses. She was not in the intensive care unit, and judging by the selenium outside the window, it was daytime. Hence, she just waited. She thought it would be natural for someone to come to her. And as if the universe answered her pleas, he entered the room. Barry. Honey, hi. The groom's lips trembled. His eyes expressed all the pain he felt at seeing Angelica in front of him. Barry. Angelica smiled. How are you? He entered the room and took her hand. Doctor, what's wrong with her? The doctor cast a glance at Angelica as if to ask who this is and how do you, patient, feel about being told about your condition. Barry is my fiancé, the girl explained. What were you doing there? Asked Barry sternly. Angelica was used to the fact that her lover's moods changed frequently, but still these changes often took her by surprise. And now she was a little offended. Could he not be a little more affectionate when she was in such a state? You'd think the firemen wouldn't have done their job. Barry, there was a baby. I heard it, snorted the boy mockingly. So what? He wasn't worth the fact that you nearly burned to death. But you were lucky. He gave her an attentive look. He wrinkled his nose and she realized he appreciated what her hair had become. It will grow back. Angelica smiled timidly. All the fear she had endured in the burning house was now receding, vanishing. She felt safe and at peace because he was Barry, her favorite, most dear man. They had met only a year ago, but from the first meeting, it seemed that they had known each other forever. Barry was Angelique's first love. She confessed it to one of her friends, and she wondered if Angelique was too old for first love. It's usually experienced earlier than 20-somethings. What does it matter when it comes? Laughed the girl. The main thing that I love. In general, Angelica did not grow up quite a recluse. There had been some light romances in her life before Barry, but nothing that would make her heart sink and make her seem the happiest on Selene. Archie, Angelica looked helplessly at the doctor. Please explain what's wrong with me, because I didn't understand anything. I mean, I realized that I was burned. You speak clearly. I just don't understand all these terms. Of course I'm sorry. Archie was embarrassed. Once again, he was wrong, because his more experienced colleagues told him that he should not pour terminology on patients, that a good doctor should be able to convey everything in understandable words, and Archie really wanted to be a good doctor. Archie spoke up. He tried not to give negative prognosis and to give hope. He did not forget to add that Angelica's condition was excellent, and then he talked about the fact that the possibilities of modern medicine allow. So you're saying she's going to stay ugly? And what's there? Barry pointed his finger at the blanket that covered Angelique. It's gonna be a burned, wrinkled mess? I didn't say that. The doctor swallowed nervously. He was young, of course, but he knew all sorts of reactions of relatives and friends of patients to reports of injuries, necessary treatment, and so on. And what was going on with Barry? He didn't like it at all, because ever since that guy had been explained what had happened to his fiancé, he had changed. Barry, what are you talking about? Angelique said, confused. I'm alive. And the scars, there's plastic surgery now. Yeah? Barry stretched out. How much is it? Archie announced the cost and Angelica's fiancé whistled. You can buy an apartment in the center and a car with that. Now he looked at his fiancée coldly, evaluating. And a dozen of these women. No, I did not sign up for such a thing. That's it. There's not gonna be the wedding. Barry. Angelica felt dizzy. Her fingers frantically crumpled the blanket. My darling. Don't get hysterical. Barry jerked away the hand that Angelica had tried to catch him with. I was going to marry a normal woman. His face contorted with a nasty grimace. I didn't have time for you. And now it's over. Barry pointed with his eyes at the same blanket under which Angelica's body was. What kind of pervert goes in there when it's like a roast pig? That's it. Shut up. And don't call me. He left the room, pushing a nurse with his shoulder on the way, who almost dropped the tray on which she was carrying food for the patient. Angelica stared silently at one point. At first, she really wanted to cry. But then, not a single tear spilled from her eyes, as if the flames that had devoured the house had belatedly reached her now, drying up her tears. Angelica leaned back on the pillows. Please leave me alone, she asked the doctor, who was about to say something. We'll leave you. You'll rest, you'll sleep. Naomi, a nurse of 20 years' experience, came into the room. In general, she did not work in the burns department, but having heard about the heroine she had come to visit once again, she took it upon herself to bring her lunch. In general, theoretically, Angelica slept through lunch, but Naomi went to the canteen and brought everything. She also saw to it that she told her friend in the kitchen to put a bigger and tastier piece of fish in this particular portion. Here all the same size and equally tasty, said Lucy, who worked in the kitchen. What about her relatives? They don't spoil her with homemade food. They haven't shown up yet, Naomi confided. They say she has no mother or father and was brought up by her aunt. So, Naomi nodded with the look of a person who understands the most complicated vagaries of life. I think it's not all smooth sailing. You don't know them at all, snorted Lucy. I don't know, but only. If they loved her, her relatives, they would have all rushed there long ago. They were called, told what happened, but they are not in a hurry. That's right, sighed Lucy. Poor thing. Oh, there are buns today. For dinner? Yes, but they're ready. Here, take it to her. Let her eat it right now, with raisins. Naomi entered the room and placed the tray on the bedside table. The body is like a starship, honey. It needs fuel. So, you'll eat now, and then sleep. Rest. Thank you, replied Angelica in a colorless voice. I don't feel like eating at all. You'll have to. Naomi shook her head. Otherwise, I won't leave. And then, was it for nothing that I took buns in the canteen? With raisins, by the way. Late that night, Angelica's phone rang. She picked it up, carefully brought it to her ears so as not to touch the bandage. Angelica, you're alive. It was the sonorous, singing voice of Sonia, her best friend. Of course, alive if I'm talking to you. I'm in the village at my grandmother's. I would have rushed to you, you know. Oh, it's a long way to get to you. And my grandmother had a kidney attack. It's happened before, but it's still scary. It's okay, Angelica sighed. Really, Sophia, I'm fine. You look after your grandmother. I'll be home soon, said her friend. Here, mother and father will return from a business trip, and they will go to grandmother, and if it works out, then in general, it will take her to the city. Oh, Angelica, why did you have to go to that house, huh? Well, you're a hero. How was the boy, by the way? They say he's fine, said Angelica. I heard the nurses say that he did not even have a jacket on fire. I thought when I woke up about him, I thought maybe he was a street kid, but he has a father, so everything is fine. What good? Sophia grinned. Wretched father. Normal parents do not have children in abandoned houses. We don't know what the situation is there. Angelica stood up for the unknown parent. Maybe they are poor. Wait, Sophia on the other side suddenly rustled something. There was a click of the keyboard. My grandmother is old, but she's advanced, my friend said. She has a computer. I'm just here for her to start a movie for her Brazilian series. Listen, I just glimpsed the news today. Well, and then they told me about you, the head of the university, and I somehow missed it. Wait a minute. All right. Well, friend, you better sit down there. You're already in the news. What? Angelica was confused. What do you mean? And what, according to you, no one is not interested to know about the superhero who took the little things out of the fire. In general, there is an article about you. Here, they say that the girl saved. Wow. And the boy is not a bum. Really? That's good. I hope his parents will take care of him now. Yeah, they'll take care of him, her friend said. Wow. His father is an oligarch. What do you mean? Angelica didn't understand. Here, I read here. John, businessman of the year of our city. Wow. What a handsome man. He's a social lion, as it were. What's that got to do with it? Angelica sighed. The main thing is that his son never got into such a situation again. It's fantastic that he was in it, her friend muttered. Oh, that's great. You're a star now. Soon, probably, journalists will come for an interview. I don't want any interviews, Angelica complained. I want to rest. That's it, rest. Get well, said Sophia, and Angelica said goodbye to her. Angelica sighed as this day dragged on endlessly long, agonizingly slow. It had already been more than 24 hours since she happened to be near this old house. And only now she stopped seeing the thirsty, merciless flames when she closed her eyes. And then the phone rang again. Angelica frowned. It was Julia calling. Her distant relative and the person who had been Angelica's guardian since her parents had died in a car accident. Julia was not, as she said many times later, to put an orphan around her neck, but she did, when she grew up. Angelica realized that it was done to look good in the eyes of numerous relatives, and most importantly, because Angelica inherited an apartment. A small apartment, not an apartment, but an apartment. Naturally, Julia could not dispose of Angelica's property freely, but she expected that when Angelica turned 18, they would do something. To be more precise, it was planned that Angelica would sell the apartment, give the proceeds to Julia, and she would use them to improve and expand her own living space, in which Julia promised her, by the way, to give her a whole room to live in. However, Angelica refused the offer, because by the time she was 18, she had only dreamed of leaving Julia's house. No, she could not say that there she was exceptionally mistreated, tyrannized, and yet Angelica was happy that no longer have to live under the control of strict Julia and follow every day of her rules. So Angelica kept her parents' one room and moved there right after she celebrated her 18th birthday. And now Julia was calling for something. Angelica took the call. "My poor girl, how are you?" "Oh, what a grief." "Aunt Julia, I'm fine. I'm alive. My arms and legs are still in place, just a little bit burned." Angelica smiled. Auntie asked about her health, apologized for not visiting her yet, because it so happened that the youngest in the family grandson, Julia, fell ill, and the eldest is in big trouble at the university, threatening expulsion. "Well, we thought that in principle, you're in the hospital, you're well taken care of. Is the food good?" "Delicious," Aunt Julia sighed Angelica. "Well, that means they're looking after you, and you can come to you? They let me in?" "Yes." "Oh, poor thing." Julia wailed again. She talked about how it was a hard blow, but they, as a family, had to stick together. "You're an invalid now." "What?" Angelica's eyes widened. "No, Aunt Julia, it's not that bad. It will require, of course, treatment." "Move in with us," the relative said hurriedly. "You can't live alone in your condition. Expensive all this, of course." "Aha." Angelica tried to move her leg and immediately grimaced at the sharp pain. And how she would walk, she had no idea. Julia kept saying that the treatment was expensive, that now Angelica would need everything. Then she transferred to the fact that they, of course, will help their relatives. But only they themselves are in money trouble, which means we need to urgently sell the apartment. "Your place, Angelica, now just at a good price can go. We'll sell it. Put the money on the account." "Well, you, of course, a little. And me." Julia announced her proposal cheerfully, as if it had already been approved and could not be canceled. "I'll take care of you. I can't quit my job, but I have a friend who will help as a nurse. I'll buy you everything you need, Anne." "Aunt Julia," Angelica tried to speak politely but firmly. "Thank you for the offer, but I'm not going to sell the apartment. Why would I do that?" On the other side there was silence, diluted by Julia's unhappy sniffing. Angelica thought of a snake hissing, and immediately the girl gave herself a mental backhand saying, "Well, what kind of nonsense? What kind of insults to relatives? Don't you realize that you have no one?" Julia said in a ruthless tone, "You're ugly now. What's your future? You won't get married. You'll be alone all your life. Me, my family, that's all you've got. You think I don't know Barry's gone? I know everything, honey. Men, they love eyes and hands. What kind of pervert would touch you now? So, think. You can still do the right thing. You'll finish the institute, go to work. We'll live together as a family. Catherine gave birth, you'll be her nanny. You won't have children of your own, understand? Because men will shy away from you when they realize you're crippled. So come on, agree, or else you'll die alone and only 40 cats will be around you." Aunt Julia, Angelica suddenly felt so funny that she couldn't hold back. 40 cats is such a tired joke. It's embarrassing to say that. You say I'll be alone? Well, better alone than with a family like yours. You think I left you by accident when I turned 18. I was sick of you. I couldn't stand it. You know." Angelica wiped the tears from her eyes. "The doctor says that I need peace. So do not call me anymore, and especially don't come here. I thought that after all, we are related people. And you." Having finished talking, Angelica leaned back on the pillow and closed her eyes. How tired she was. But no matter how tired she was, she had to hold on. She dozed off again. In the evening after dinner, she remembered that she had seen missed calls on her phone, but because of the snake-attacking conversation with Julia, she had overlooked it. Now Angelica called them back. There were several classmates and teachers, the rector. They expressed sympathy, wished her a speedy recovery. The rector said that his wife was a medic, well-versed in medicines and could help. Look for where to sell the necessary drugs. Angelica thanked him and said that so far she seemed to have everything. Actually, the doctor had already recommended some medicines, but the girl was just embarrassed to burden outsiders with her problems. "Angelica, we're here to see you. Only now, today, we found out." Angelica smiled. She came to visit the guys from the Institute, Austin, Alice, and Steve. "All heard to you." Austin winked and held out a bouquet of pink hyacinths. "For a positive mood. Here's more," he rustled, taking out juice, candy, a package of sliced cheese, a bag of fruit. Soon there wasn't enough room on the nightstand by the bed. Guys, why so much? Oh, it'll fall. Angelica caught a pack of almond cookies that almost fell on the floor. Thank you so much. Steve sat back in his chair, put his foot on his leg, and looked around the room with a serious look. It's a nice suite. Are you getting discharged soon? The doctor says in a couple of weeks or so. We talked some more about how things were going at the university, about what to do next. Angelica, when her friends left, felt happy. After all, no matter what evil Aunt Julia fantasized, she was not alone, so she'll get through this somehow. The next day, Dr. Archie carefully reported that journalists wanted to talk to her, but he did not let them in, saying that visiting relatives is one thing, and communication on disturbing topics is another and can be harmful to a recovering person who needs peace. Thank you, thanked Angelica, who didn't want to talk to the press at all, because what's there to talk about? Well, I saved a boy. So what's next? Let the kid live well and let his father or whoever else he has in his family not allow anything like that. The doctor left. Angelica could not allow herself to sleep on her side. On her back was tiresome and seemed terribly uncomfortable. But she had to put up with it, close her eyes. What is this? She was jerked out of her slumber by the nurse's indignant voice. Visiting hours are over. Man, stop right there. You're not supposed to be visiting now. I'll call the guards. Then the nurse was silent and a male voice unknown to Angelica quietly addressed her, and then its owner appeared in the doorway of the room. Wow, Angelica thought, how spectacular. Generally, she was not fond of male appearance, but this stranger made an impression. Tall, brown-eyed with a masculine chin and a light stubble, dressed in a business suit, but snow-white shirt unbuttoned exposing the sharp articulation of the collarbones and a gold chain. The last detail of the image seemed terribly funny to Angelica. She thought that gold chains were worn only by gangsters of the 90s. The girl could not resist and laughed, snorting not gracefully at all. It would be necessary, Angelica thought, to ask the doctors if the medication she was given had a side effect in the form of an inappropriate sense of humor. The stranger raised an eyebrow questioningly. What was so funny about him coming into the room? But he didn't ask anything about it, instead introducing himself as John and adding that he was the father of the rescued boy. Yeah, Angelica smiled. Hello, how is he? Jacob's fine. You saved him. I don't know how to thank you. He stepped closer, and Angelica lowered her eyes in embarrassment. She wasn't used to being thanked for anything, and even now it seemed unnecessary. And besides, she couldn't bear to look into his piercing brown eyes. How strange it was. Definitely, she thought, definitely, it's all this perception of reality. It's because of the experience, and maybe it's because of the medication after all. And then she said something she didn't mean to. You better watch your son, Father of the Year. John arched an eyebrow again. Actually, I wasn't the one who looked after him. All the more reason. Angelica pounded the bed with her fist. It's dangerous to leave your children with strangers. And where was his mom? We don't have a mom. A gloomy shadow slid across the man's face, but it disappeared immediately. She died when he was born. Oh, Angelica's cheeks flushed. I'm sorry. I sympathize. It's all right. It was a long time ago, he said and stepped closer. Unfortunately, the nanny was negligent, but it's my fault too. I should have chosen my staff more carefully. And you? How are you? His gaze seemed to explore her from top to toe. Angelica wanted to say that she was fine, but that would be a lie. She didn't regret for a moment, not for an atom, that she had saved the boy, but she just couldn't deny that she had suffered a nightmare. It had ruined her life. She had been abandoned by the man she loved. Doctors say that she will need a long treatment, and she is just a student, just getting a diploma. She seemed to have her whole life ahead of her. But how to live this life now? She is now. The fiancé and Aunt Julia were right. She has become ugly. How can she walk and live with her legs like that? Why did this happen to her? Angelica poured out her soul, her thoughts, her fears, and her pain. She cried and talked. She sniffed her nose and wiped it with the corner of the sheet. She roared heartily and was not ashamed of it at all. At last, apparently attracted by the sounds of hysterics, The very nurse who had been present at Angelica's awakening appeared in the room, as well as the two doctors. Angelica, through a veil of tears, realized that they were insisting that the visitor leave because the patient clearly had no time to talk. She saw how the man, this John, was looking at her and what was reading on his face. Pity for her. And it made Angelique weep more than ever because it made her feel ugly. Then John left. The doctor brought her water, offered her some sedatives to drink, and she agreed, and then she finally fell asleep. The next day, when breakfast was served, Angelica finally stopped being so immersed in herself and even talked a little with her roommates. They had gotten to know each other earlier. There were two of them, a woman in her 50s. Her name was Maria. Both of her hands were injured. She had knocked over some soup from the stove when the kids were spinning under her feet. Fortunately, the children were not hurt. The second was a young Selena. She was unlucky when they went out into the countryside to barbecue someone who did not know what splashed into the fire to ignite the flame hotter, and it went up in a wave. The one who splashed managed to bounce, but Selena did not, and she suffered left side, shoulder, and part of the back. Angelica sympathized with the neighbors, and very embarrassed because they unanimously recognized her as a heroine for saving the child. And your fiancé will still realize who he lost, but it will be too late, consoled her Selena. Bastard scoundrel. But it's good that now revealed what he is, and not later, when they would have already married. The truth of life, supported her Maria, and the on in place you correctly put. Look, on the apartment accelerated. Naturally, they talked about many things among themselves, and then, after dinner, suddenly a huge basket was brought into the room. It's heavy, man, said the nurse Naomi, putting her burden down on the table. Dr. Harvey came in after her. Is that for me? Angelica stared in amazement at the fancy mountain of flowers and exotic fruits. Is anyone allergic to flowers? Naomi asked. We don't have a vase, sorry. And there's a base with artificial moist soil in the basket itself, Angelica said, looking inside. But who's it from? From the boy's father, the nurse explained. What a luxury. He paid for all the drugs you were prescribed, Harvey said. That's a manly thing to do, said Maria, who, together with Selena, was curious about the rich gift for their neighbor. Angelica did not know what to say, and then the doctor added something that almost made her speechless. It turned out that John asked him to recommend which private clinic Angelica should go to for quality treatment after she was discharged from the hospital. John decided to pay in full for everything she might need in the future, including the services of a plastic surgeon, and he also gave her his cell phone number to call if she needed anything. But I, Angelica whispered, you know, pride is a good thing, Harvey sighed, adjusting his glasses. But if I were you, I would agree. Understand, you are really very seriously hurt. Burns and injuries seriously affect your quality of life and your abilities in the future. And since this man feels it's his moral obligation to support you, I think it's foolish to refuse. Say yes, Maria said quietly. I remember when I went with my first, I fell on the ice in winter. The bruise was the entire 5th point. And what do you think? My husband-in-law, at least take pity, at least bring ice cream or Apple's favorite. But no, only grumbled that I say in hospitals lying around. Why? I had to look at the preservation after all. The fall was not serious. In general, he grumbled that I couldn't manage the household alone. At him. And here? No, Angelica. Definitely do not dare to refuse. I agree, sighed Angelica and reached for the basket. She chose one fruit, pink, funny, with scales, and remembered how it is called dragon fruit. Girls, help yourselves. And you please too, she smiled at the doctor and the nurse. Lying in the hospital, of course, was no fun at all, but soon Angelica got used to her new routine. It turned out that the food here was also not bad, and also, with the help of Selena, once ordered a pizza courier was not allowed beyond the threshold of the hospital for some reason. But the same nurse ran for the order, and she, of course, treated. Doctors said that Angelica's body was recovering at an astonishing rate. Soon the girl could even walk a little, but had to lean on crutches. And the awarding of diplomas soon, she, unfortunately, realized that she would miss. One day a woman came into the ward, Angelica did not pay much attention here, often went to visit her neighbors. The girl leafed through a fresh issue of a magazine on floriculture, indulging in dreams that someday she will have a cottage, where she will be able to create a magical garden, where there will be everything she loves. Angelica, a stranger stopped by her bedside. "My name is Betty. I'm from Glamorous City magazine. Can we talk?" "Hello," said a confused Angelique. "But you're a journalist, and no, I'm sorry, but it's hard for me to think about the fire. And then, I didn't do anything like that. Actually, we already did a story about that fire." The woman pulled out a chair, sat down on it, took out a smartphone from her purse, and clicked something on it. "You don't mind the tape recorder?" "I do." Angelica struggled to sit up on the bed. The unknown lady started to adjust the pillow under her back. "Don't, I'll do it myself." Angelica waved her hands. "I'd like to talk to you about your relationship with John Stone." "What relationship?" "Well, dear, there is no need for this unnecessary modesty," grinned the journalist. "Your affair is already the talk of the town. It's just fantastic. You saved his son, and he fell in love with you. Seeing a good soul, it's so romantic." "Wow." Maria was listening with curiosity from her bed. "We haven't noticed anything like that, have we, Selena?" "We're not having an affair." Angelica rounded her eyes. Her heart beat faster. What a silly thing to say. Who could have thought it up? "What do you mean we're not?" Betty squinted her eyes, and it was clear she didn't believe her. "I understand that you are afraid to publicize your relationship, because the girl of the heir to the Stone clan will be so much attention. But believe me, I just want to know the truth and details. I promise, I'll let you read the draft of the interview, and if you want, we'll edit it. We're not having an affair. Look, I don't know who told you such a stupid thing. Can you please leave?" "Actually, it's not our magazine's policy to pay," Betty pouted. "Publication with us is a gift to anyone who wants to be recognized, but $30,000 for an exclusive will do." "What?" Angelica felt like crying at the nonsense going on here. "Go away, please. I'm not going to tell you anything." "Archie," she noticed a familiar doctor walking down the corridor. The journalist was clearly annoyed at being turned away. She snorted, picked up her smartphone, threw Angelica a disgruntled look and left. "And my story," Selena said. Angelica had lied to her friends about being discharged on Tuesday. She was being discharged on Monday. She just felt uncomfortable. She felt like she was already being taken care of too much. So, why burden people, good people who have lives of their own? It's not hard to call a cab, and luckily there's an elevator in the house, so it's easy to get to the 8th floor. Angelica said goodbye to her neighbors on the ward. They were discharged later. They even exchanged phone numbers, and Angelica realized she had new friends. Angelica stood on the hospital porch, leaning on crutches, a bag with things on the floor next to her. The cab was delayed. Looking for it, she didn't pay attention to the black foreign car that entered the yard. Suddenly she saw John. He got out of that car, again in a suit, but now with a tie, and in his hands a huge bouquet of scarlet roses. Angelica looked at him dumbfounded, and he was getting closer. "Congratulations on the discharge," said, and held out the bouquet, but immediately embarrassed because the girl's hands were busy with crutches. "What are you doing here?" "I came to pick you up." "What do you mean?" "If I'm not mistaken," he nodded at the bag, "you were discharged today. I can give you a ride." "Thanks, but I already called a cab." "It can be canceled." "You can, but you don't have to." Angelique raised her chin proudly. "I am deeply grateful to you for helping me financially, but really, I myself. You're not refusing because you're afraid to get into my car." The man's eyebrow rose up mockingly. "No, of course not." "Then what's stopping you from accepting my offer?" Angelica closed and opened her mouth. She really didn't know what to say. And before she found it, a new actor, Aunt Juliet, appeared in the hospital courtyard, as well as her son. "My girl, well, we made it. How are you?" "Oh, you poor thing. So young and an invalid." Angelica had never thought about how unpleasant and luscious her relative's voice was. Angelica cringed at the sight of these people she least wanted to see on the day of her discharge, when all she wanted to do was to slowly begin to return to normal life. And then Angelica was shocked because Julia had decided that she was going to live with them. because there's no way an invalid could live on her own. I'm not going anywhere, Angelica replied sharply. Oh, girl waved her aunt's hands, as she was a fool, so she remained. Son, take her bag and come on. Carry it to the car. Stop. John intercepted the limb that reached for the bag. She said she didn't want to go with you. Who the hell are you? Our Angelica's sick. We're her family. We're here for her. And this is the first time we've seen you. Man, get away. Julia started yelling. John, Angelica said with determination, please take me home. She realized that she agreed and wanted to get out of here as soon as possible, especially since the cab was running late and there was no moral strength to withstand Lita's aggressive preoccupation. Nodding, John beckoned with his hand to his driver, who had been waiting in the car all this time. He got out, took Angelica's bag and loaded it into the trunk. John himself, estimating the 6 steps of the porch, suddenly picked up the girl in his arms. Ouch! Angelica squeaked. It hurt a little because he carried her under his knees, that is, touched the injured part of the body, but more she squeaked from surprise. Let go. You're on crutches. There's a risk of falling. Why else would you break your legs? He arched an eyebrow. It's been enough, poor thing. He gently set her on the ground and opened the car door for her. Angelica, thanking him, ducked into the cabin. How great it was to leave Julia's mouth open in amazement. Man, what are you doing? Who are you? Julia almost shrieked and ran to the car. Are you kidnapping her? Kidnapping? Angelica couldn't see the look on John's face, but she could tell from his tone. I'm just helping her. Why would you do that? Who the hell are you? Her fiancé, John answered, and the aunt was silent as if her voice had been cut off. He got into the back seat next to Angelica and slammed the door and told the driver to go. What was that? Angelica asked. What, bride? Well, everyone knows about our relationship, John replied with a nonchalant expression. Angelica frowned. She remembered the journalist and her words. But what do journalists, such fictitious people, write? But why is this man, who had been behaving decently and generously helping her, talking crazy? What is this nonsense? Angelica asked. What, bride? Calm down. Stress has a negative effect on the immune system. John smiled at her. I'll explain everything to you. Except what he said didn't explain it. It confused it even more. It turned out that John had a longtime girlfriend. Her name was Ariana, a socialite, a model, a gorgeous couple. But then it turned out that Ariana had a habit of going out with everyone and she had to be dumped. And as luck would have it, it happened the day before John had to sign a contract with a very serious man, who was known for being very reverent and demanding about the moral character of his business partners. It turned out that the conclusion of the contract was in danger of failure. Then John decided that it was a brilliant idea to spread the word that he suddenly fell in love with a simple, pure, and kind girl who saved his son. Agreed, it's a fabulous story. Judging by his tone, he was obviously proud of his fiction. However, Angelica did not share his enthusiasm. Are you crazy? Without me such a made-up, she waved her hands, and nothing better did not come up with. What if I had a fiancé or a husband? I know that your fiancé left you when he found out about your condition. I agree that it's a bit rambling, but you don't have anything to lose. It won't take long. I just have an important deal to make, and then he shrugged. We'll announce that we've broken up. Is it okay if it's just like that? I might not like it. How so? John reached up and brushed a strand of hair away from her face. Angelica closed her mouth and opened it again. How outrageous this whole thing was. On moral grounds, she squeaked. That's it. But I am prepared to pay generously. That doesn't negate the help you're getting from me and will get to restore your health. Angelique had an itch to slap someone, but then John named the amount. I'm not for sale. She stuck her chin out proudly. It's compensation for helping me, he grinned. Think how many years you'll work for that amount of money. Am I offering something so nightmarish, so immoral? It's like fraud. Come on, John exclaimed. You see, if I make a contract, a lot of people won't lose their jobs. Fathers will have something to feed their families. People won't be on the street. And you're not risking anything. I'm not. He smiled wryly. I'm not asking you to be my real girlfriend. That's the last thing I need. So you're okay with it? I didn't say that. Just think about it. We're here, he said and got out of the car first, giving her his hand. One thing I ask. Don't talk to the press alone. As soon as the door of the apartment was closed, Angelica sternly told herself not to think about John and his strange proposal, not to think about Julia, and not to think about the outside world at all. Right now, there is only her and her own need to rest, to be in peace and quiet, in the comfort of her own home. The girl sat down on the sofa. What a horror. Lon will have to put up with the fact that every movement hurts, and even if she found a wild beach, a piece of riverbank, where there are no people, this year she would have to forget about it. Angelica went to the kitchen to make herself a cup of tea, opened the refrigerator and quietly groaned with frustration, of course. It had managed to spoil a lot of products. She had to urgently do the cleaning, and then, naturally, could not think about going to the store today. She felt insanely tired. Therefore, all the necessary, Angelica ordered a delivery to the house, and then decided to treat herself to pizza. The evening passed under the movie watched a silly romantic comedy in which the protagonist met a rich guy, unaware that he had a twin brother who was going to insidiously destroy their idyll. Then she took the medication prescribed by the doctor and finally went to bed. The next couple of days passed in peace and quiet. Angelica did nothing all day long, eating good food and watching TV. She had plenty of time to think about John's proposal, and she finally made a decision. We need to talk, she said as soon as he picked up the phone. Great, we'll talk now. I'm in the driveway. I've come to get you. Angelica looked out of the window. So it is standing and waving a bouquet of roses, this time pink. Actually, we could have done it over the phone. Come on, the man grinned. The weather is wonderful. Aren't you tired of sitting there? How about we go for a ride to a place? Where to? I won't tell you, because then I'd spoil the surprise. Angelica wrinkled her nose and sighed. Not that she didn't like surprises, but her relationship with this man had clearly gotten very strange. And before things could get even more confused, she needed to make a decision and have a serious talk with him. Besides, there's one person who wants to talk to you. Who? Angelique didn't understand. My son, she could feel the smile in John's voice. He keeps asking about you. He wants to thank you for saving him. But if you're busy today, or if you just don't want to, I do, Angelique said quickly. She suddenly realized that she just needed to see the boy, and even though she knew that he was fine, she just needed to see him alive, healthy, and to tell him that he was very brave in the house. Angelica went downstairs, taking the bouquet. The flowers will wilt while we drive, she said, burying her nose in the silky sea of pebbles. Roses smelled just delicious. No problem, he said. Give me the keys. I'll go up and put them in a vase. Just tell me where you have the vase. Angelica shrugged. In principle, she would have done it herself, but the elevator was broken, and of course, it would be terribly tiring in her condition to walk up to the 8th floor. John took the bouquet, left, and returned 5 minutes later. Got in the car. Where are we going? Angelica stared out the window. We're almost there, he said, as the car turned from the outskirts of the city onto a road leading to an upscale cottage community. And then the car drove into one of the plots where behind a high brick fence surrounded by a lush garden stood a 2-story mansion. And what a garden it was! The girl burst out a delighted exclamation of amazement when she saw it. Amazing! It was really a beautiful garden with the eyes of a professional. Angelica appreciated that a talented gardener had a hand in it. Do you like it? John grinned. Personally, I've never understood why you'd have to grow so much useless greenery. You shouldn't have done that thing about me being your fiancé. Angelica shook her head. You and I are nothing alike. Opposites attract, John smiled. You seem to love all sorts of things. Plants and flowers? Gardening, creating beautiful things from flora is my life. I've known since I was a little girl that I was going to be a landscaper. I just didn't know what it was called at first. Angelica realized that it sounded a bit pathetic, but it was true. Let's go inside, John said and led her to the mansion. The door was opened by a woman in a maid's uniform who led them into a room where a boy was sitting at a small table, concentrating on drawing something. The fairy is here. The boy squealed with delight and rushed toward Angelica, and she leaned forward, which was not easy because of her crutch, and opened her arms to him. "Hello, Jacob. How are you?" "Good," the boy smiled. "You saved me. And you? Are you in pain? You were crying the other day." "No, I'm fine now. I went to the hospital and they fixed me up." "Are you all right?" "Almost. Did they give you shots?" "I'm afraid of hospitals." "Not without them," smiled Angelica. "But everything is fine now. And you're not sick anymore, right? And I come to visit you." "Yes, I'm painting. I got new paints. Do you want to paint?" Angelica glanced at John and he nodded. "I'm gonna go make lunch arrangements." Actually, Angelica wasn't going to stay for lunch, but then she thought maybe she shouldn't say no. It's just lunch. She spent the next half hour playing with the baby. Jacob turned out to be very smart and cheerful. He liked not only to draw, but also to collect cars from the constructor. Finally, a woman in a maid's uniform appeared in the room, but not the one who had opened the door. "You have to put the toys away when you've played," she told Jacob, and the boy reluctantly but obeyed. "Are you his nanny?" Angelica asked, taking the woman aside. "Yes, my name is Sophia. I was hired after the accident." "You mean the fire?" The woman gave the boy a sympathetic look. He was so scared. "You're a hero." "Oh, but don't please." Angelica waved her hands, who still couldn't be embarrassed by expressions of gratitude. Sophia understood and stopped, and then shared something with the guest. It turned out that on that fateful day, the boy was out for a walk with Nanny and Ariana. According to the nanny's story, Jacob had a fight with his father's ex-girlfriend and decided to run away from everyone when they were in the park. He managed to sneak away, to get lost, and then he decided to crawl into an old house. Homeless people sometimes went there, and as it was later suggested, it was probably a homeless man who threw a cigarette there carelessly, or maybe he decided to make a fire for some reason. In short, the whole terrible situation arose as a result of coincidence of several events. Sophia also said that John was furious when he found out what had happened. He fired the nanny and broke up with Ariana, realizing that she was the one who had driven the child to tears that day in the desire to run away. "Excuse me, there's another maid in the room. Mr. Stone invites you to the table." "Jacob, shall we go to dinner?" Angelica called out to the boy. "I don't dine with Papa," he replied gravely. "I only eat breakfast on weekends. I eat in my room. I have a small table there. I'd eat with the nanny. And there is a teddy bear, a bunny, a robot, my favorite toys." Angelica sighed. She just couldn't understand this method of upbringing. How to feed a child separately. When she was little, she always ate at the same table with her parents, and when they came to visit, she was not kicked out. No, still this John, despite what he had done for her, did not like it. When Angelica entered the room, or rather the dining room, she was very surprised, because besides John there was another person there, a man of some years. "My dear, let me express my admiration." He stepped to her, caught her hand and kissed her gallantly. "In our time, in such an act, you restore faith in the fact that today's youth is worth something." "I'm sorry." Angelica was a little speechless, and also a little angry because she was really tired of being praised so often for what had happened. "You haven't introduced me to your lovely fiancé yet, have you? How can I ever do business with you in such a case?" In a reproachfully jocular tone, the elderly stranger addressed John. "I apologize for such an oversight." John smiled. "Honey, let me introduce you to Michael, my business partner, the one who will give our company a second wind." From John's meaningful look, Angelica guessed that this was the man for whom he had started this whole adventure to call himself her fiancé. "Very nice to meet you," Angelica said. She felt resentment, indignation. Yes, John had helped. He had lent a helping hand when he knew how she had been hurt, but he had not done it out of the blue, but because she had risked herself to save his son. But he thinks that if he puts her in that position, she'll play along with him. "I'm sorry, I have something to tell you." Angelica didn't move from her seat when John invited her and his guests to the table, which was already lavishly, restaurant-style set for dinner. "I'm not John's fiancé." Michael looked rather shocked. He turned to John. He was shocked too, and Angelica realized he hadn't expected her to be so frank. He must have been 100% sure she would play along. But Angelique just couldn't do that. She hated lies with all her heart, and she said many other important things. That John had put it to her that he wanted, no, that he had decided that she would pretend to be his fiancé. I don't know why he did it. Angelica raised her chin proudly, maybe because she thinks she can buy me. And you know what? Now she turned to John. I'll pay back all the money you spent paying for my medicine. And I'm not taking a penny from you. Yes, I need treatment, and I'll probably need a plastic surgeon too. But I can do it on my own. I'll find the money. I'll earn it eventually. I'll take out a loan. But I will not participate in such dirty games. I'm sorry, she said to Michael and left the room. Fortunately, the door from the dining room led the girl straight into a spacious hallway, the antechamber of the mansion, so she found her way out without getting lost. Angelica cautiously descended the stairs. Her legs, which she had given too much exercise today, were sore. I guess it was still necessary to use crutches sometimes. She turned around and John wasn't following her. Oh, good. All she had to do was tell the guard at the gate to let her out. Angelica turned off the lawn onto one of the paths and walked between the hedges. It was such a big garden, she wouldn't get lost. However, she was confident in herself and turned into its thickets, just thinking that moving like that, through the thick of the garden, can reach the gate unnoticed. And if she went directly through the lawn, then what else is good? John will jump out, will start to persuade. Well, no. Angelica snorted mockingly. She would not allow herself to be manipulated. Let this rich man not think to himself that he can buy anything he wants, including someone else's conscience. Angelica was so immersed in her thoughts that she didn't notice how the ground under her feet suddenly changed, and now she was treading on soft, loose earth. The girl lowered her eyes and was horrified that she was in the center of the plantings. All around her, recently transplanted plants were visible from the ground, and some of them seemed to have been destroyed by the soles of her sneakers. What? What are you doing? A shout of indignation made Angelica look up, and she saw a guy standing in front of her. Dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, the blond man was holding gardening tools. His cloth gloves were smeared with soil. Shoo! Actually, everything she'd heard now, hearing it was logical in the face of what she'd accidentally done. But this last shoo, thrown carelessly, as if it was not even a person being chased away, but a naughty dog or a bird, had a strange effect on Angelica, and she roared. After a moment, however, it came to her that she was not offended by the shoo, but just became heavy as if suddenly under the weight of emotions and events collapsed nervous system, which strictly speaking, and so already served a decent. I'm sorry, she mumbled through her tears. I didn't do it on purpose. I was just walking. I didn't look under my feet. I'm sorry. I'll be right back. She took a step away. Asters, exclaimed the guy, and Angelica yelped and jumped away from the flower bed, where she almost flew. Give her a hand, the blonde told her sternly. You are swaying for some reason. You will fall. You are drunk. I didn't drink. I don't drink at all. Angelica sniffed her nose and leaned on his outstretched hand. It's just that my legs hurt. Burns. Then you'll forgive me, the boy said softly. You need to sit down. Here, a bench. Thank you. She sat down and stretched her legs. She remembered she'd forgotten to take her painkillers. I'm sorry. I was in a hurry and didn't look where I was going. I'm from over there. She waved towards the house. I was leaving. Why did you come? The blonde asked. To get a job. John's waiting for a tutor for his son. No, I didn't come for that. Angelica sighed. Just visiting. Oh yeah, the guy grinned. You don't look like John's girlfriend. Because I have burns? Angelica grumbled. What? No, I don't. Oh, I'm sorry. That's not what I meant. The guy nervously adjusted his glasses. It's just that his girlfriends usually look like plastic dolls. And you're quite lively and pretty. And you, aren't you by any chance the girl who saved Jacob? It's just that you mentioned the burns. Angelica nodded. Don't start talking about what a good deed she'd done. The boy just nodded, however, and then rising, walked a couple steps away and sat down near a small flower bed. Did you have a fight with him? Since you left so quickly? Sort of, she replied. And what's your name? Alexander. The guy smiled, and Angelica thought that his eyes were also brown, a little like John's. but they looked, it seemed so, 1,000 times kinder and warmer. Do you work here? Are you the gardener? You guessed it. Yes, this is all my property. He waved his hand as if to circle the green and flowery expanses. Great, said Angelique. Very beautiful. The alpine slide is very original. How did you guess to combine succulents and fescue in it? That's so bold. But the colored pebbles, sorry, distracting. It's a very bright accent. You know about gardening? The guy arched an eyebrow. I'm a landscape designer, smiled Angelica. Really, just out of university. So, a colleague, Alexander smiled back. The remark about the pebbles is really interesting. But this is the idea, because the slide will still be changed and there will be something harmonizing in palette with the bottom of the water stream. This garden, the guy added thoughtfully, all I have. It was so surprising and strange, but the words, like threads folded into a single lace pattern, added to other words, and Angelica, losing track of time, talked to Alexander. He was 25 years old. He had also received the education appropriate to his business. And now he was ready to seriously transform the garden by removing something, leaving something, and of course creating something completely new. Angelica was not inclined to tell much about herself at the first meeting, but with Alexander it was different, and she did not notice that she opened up as she allowed herself only with her best friends. And then, of course, the day itself reminded how much time they had talked. The sun was already slipping towards sunset. After saying goodbye to the gardener, Angelica returned to her previous route and soon left the grounds of the mansion. No one tried to stop her, and it looked as if John hadn't even come out to look for her when she left so quickly. So let it be, Angelica decided. Let them finally parted. She could live without his financial help. When she got home, Angelica had dinner, read a little, and went to bed. Waking up in the morning, the girl looked at the clock. 10 in the morning. Yesterday's day was hectic, nervous, tiresome, and she had slept so well. However, of course, it also affected her health. Angelica had already begun to accept the fact that her life would never be the same after what had happened. Having cleaned herself up a little, she went to the kitchen, where she prepared a breakfast of cornflakes with milk. At breakfast, Angelica habitually tucked into her smartphone, browsing through her social networking feeds. The smartphone beeped with a bird's trill, notifying her of a new message. Angelica opened it. It was a text message from the bank. It said that a very large amount of money had been credited to her account. The girl froze over a bowl of breakfast cereal. It was something incomprehensible because she was not expecting a paycheck. Angelica worked, of course, but this spring, on the eve of graduation, she lived on savings because she decided that she needed to focus on the most important thing, that is, on the finals of her studies. She also didn't wait for her debts to be paid back because she never lent to anyone, and the amount was obscenely large. And then the ringtone of the incoming call played. It was John. Good morning. His voice sounded serene, as if yesterday was nothing so offensive. How are you feeling? Did you transfer the money to me? Angelica guessed because she thought there was nowhere else to get such a sum. I did, John replied. I don't want anything from you. I'll transfer it all back. There's no need to react so hastily. Angelica, I must apologize. I shouldn't have started this in the first place. What makes you think you can control me? I am truly sorry, John interrupted her delicately, but with emotional pressure. And I think you ought to accept the sum. But you're a real landscaper now, aren't you? He interrupted her again. In that case, could you refuse me a favor? What kind of favor? I'd like to change the garden. It hasn't been renovated in a long time. You could do it, and I'd pay for it. So the money in your account could be not just, say, my support, but a reward. All is fair. It's too much even to work on a garden as big as yours. Angelique objected, but not so confidently. It can be considered a salary, as well as bonuses in honor of the fact that this will be your first order. Well, the girl stretched out, but you already have a gardener, and he's very talented. He won't mind if I do something. Alexander, John grinned. He's just a servant. If I decide to tear the garden down, his opinion will mean nothing. When she heard that, Angelica clenched her teeth, as some people, John for example, like to boast of their wealth, power, while belittling and humiliating other people. And yet, Angelica understood that sometimes her attitude to the world around her should be held a little. She realized that in her profession, she would have to face all kinds of people, and the ability to keep silent and communicate politely within the framework of her duties, so to speak, was very valuable. Besides, John continued, I've spoken to him. He doesn't mind having an assistant. The garden, as you saw for yourself, is great. I have to think about it. Think about it, but not for long. Angelique, I can promise you that there won't be any more of this. I mean, the way I acted when trying to get you to play along with me. By the way, when are you gonna, I don't know, get this whole affair thing out of the press? I've already officially denied it. You have nothing to worry about. There's a lot of work to be done on the garden, but you don't have to do it. That's what Alexander is for, and if necessary, you'll have more helpers. Angelica thought all day, and then at 9 o'clock in the evening called and said that she agreed. Angelica arrived 2 days later, and as if her own body received a command, say, today, we need to feel better this day, she had almost no pain, no itching of the affected places, and in general her health was such that she walked easily, was full of strength and vigor. Over her shoulder was slung what she called her work bag. That is just a very capacious bag where she kept her blotters, notebooks, and other small things for planning future work with the garden. Angelica was excited about her upcoming meeting with Alexander. John had told her that he was not against her participation in the work on the garden, but another person's intrusion into his possessions could bring difficulties. But Angelica was ready for them and decided that in the future the garden would be realized only those ideas that Alexander would really support. She would not insist and argue. Hello, Alexander smiled at her. So it means that I will not work alone. He looked at her carefully. Well, let's see what they teach landscape designers today. Didn't you study? Angelica asked. Not really. I don't have a diploma, if that's what you mean. My teacher was Billy. Have you heard of him? The girl gasped and nodded. Of course you haven't. In his time, this man was known for his ability to create luxurious gardens for the elite of the Soviet Union. He was even allowed to participate in several international exhibitions, and it was believed that his rose gardens are unrivaled even in England itself, where it would seem roses were one of the favorite flowers since the Victorian era. So how did you learn from him? It's just that my grandmother knew him. I mean, her cousin was a dressmaker from whom Billy's wife often ordered outfits. And it just so happened that they met. It's a long story, some other time. Right now, we got more important things to talk about. We talked about the upcoming. Angelica hastened to clarify that personally she would not want to change anything in the garden drastically, for example, to remove trees. It seems to me that a garden is like a stone, the cut of which can be renewed and its beauty emphasized with a skillful setting. I like the way you think, Alexander said. So I suggest that we include this in our project. It turned out that Alexander was really talented and without any diploma. Angelica noted his deep knowledge of plants and the principles of garden design. They talked, listening attentively to each other, then began to argue. Time flew by unnoticed. When it was time for lunch, Alexander went to the house and came back with sandwiches, salad, pie in the style of charlaka, but with pears and bottles of lemonade. We spread a blanket and settled down on the grass. And then, Angelica got used to working together with Alexander very quickly. Soon they started some practical tasks. It was possible to plant perennials. They just had time to get used to the new place before wintering. However, Alexander was always trying to take on the heavy work. Angelica, in response, constantly took offense and never tired of reminding that she, of course, has some health problems. But that does not make her helpless and useless. Alexander as if conceded to her in words, and then when it came to business worked himself, assigning Angelica something easier. Work on the transformation of the garden was carried out not only on the territory of the mansion, so several times traveled to plant nurseries in the suburbs. Once Alexander invited her to an art exhibition where they wandered, admiring the art of the peoples of Africa, talking about life and along the way drawing inspiration for his project. He and she thought to bring a pinch of exoticism. It was strange and surprising, but very soon Angelique began to perceive Alexander not only as a partner in work. She realized it when it started to rain, popped into the nearest cafe to wait out the downpour. They sat down at a table, ordered a non-alcoholic mulled wine, and suddenly, Angelica realized she was no longer hurt by the parting with Barry. Her heart is open for something new. She looked at her interlocutor, this time timidly, from under the eyelashes, and thought, does he have a girlfriend? It seems that so far Alexander had not said anything like that. But for nothing on Selena, Angelica was not ready to make the first step. And then Alexander made the first step. It happened when Angelica once again came to the garden. The day before, a whole mountain of serious work had been completed here, and now there seemed to be little things left. What is this? She asked when Alexander handed her a box. When she opened it, Angelica found a dozen pots. Violets, Alexander replied. You said you wanted something special. And he named her the varieties of flowers that were planted in the pots. Angelica rounded her eyes. She really dreamed of many of them, but thought that these novelties would be on sale only next year. It was so delightful, so tender. Angelica couldn't help herself and threw herself around his neck. Thank you. Actually, that's not all, grinned Alexander, hugging her lightly in return. I'd like to ask you out on a date. But Angelica's eyes faded now. Fear was splashing in them. But you, it's impossible. Why? He asked, and Angelica was ready to scream and cry because, wasn't it obvious? What kind of love? What kind of relationship after what had happened to her? It doesn't matter to me, Alexander said. He stepped closer. His palms gently descended on the girl's shoulders. It wouldn't matter to any normal person. You were beautiful. You stayed that way. And what happened? I'm only sorry you had to go through the pain. But you're the most beautiful girl on Celine to me. Angelica couldn't hold back her tears, and he was silent for a while, just hugging her, letting her spill out the pain and nightmare of the past. And then when she felt better, he asked again if she would go out with him. And Angelica said yes. The relationship was fast-paced and leisurely at the same time. Although Angelica accepted Alexander's soothing words with all her heart, she didn't feel ready for them to become lovers, and he was in no hurry. Sometimes he came to visit her. They could watch TV together, play a board game. Several times he took her by car to a private clinic where she was undergoing treatment. He joked that this way she could save money on cabs, and she realized he was spending time to support her morally, to cheer her up. So, no way tonight? Angelica was on the phone with Alexander. It had been about 3 weeks since the beginning of their romantic relationship, and the girl hoped that they could go to see a movie as the premiere of a comedy about love. She was a little surprised that Alexander suddenly changed his plans, although it seemed that he had said earlier that he would be free that day. And she didn't like the way his voice sounded. He was very tense. Okay, then please call me when you are free, she said, and ended the call. Alexander berated himself 1,000 times for letting his emotions get the best of him. He shouldn't have let everything that was going on in his life hurt Angelica in any way. But then he had to pull himself together. He had a very important job waiting for him. That same day, a man arrived at John's house. His name was Damien, and he was the notary who handled all the affairs of John's father, who had passed away about 3 months before. John's father had been ill for a long time and had had a weak heart since his youth. And even before the funeral, it was discovered that he had written a letter to the son, anticipating that everything might end for him at any moment. In it, he said goodbye to his son, gave him some fatherly instructions, and also asked that John should not be in a hurry to find out the contents of the will. His father had wanted its promulgation for John to take place 3 months after the funeral. John was quite surprised by this decision of his father's, but then he decided that, in principle, he would not oppose his father's last will and testament. And so the day came. Are you ready? The notary addressed John as they entered his father's study. Naturally, Stone nodded and sat down in the chair. The notary took a seat across from him at his father's desk. He began to unfold the papers without hurry. So, can we begin? John was in no hurry, but it seemed strange to him that the notary was slow. He also looked at his smartphone, as if he was waiting for a call from someone right now, during his important working hours. We're waiting for one more person, Damien said. What? What are you talking about? John frowned. I don't understand. His comprehension became even less just to the level of the Mariana Trench when the office door opened and Alexander entered. The gardener had changed his clothes. Usually he wore jeans, some ridiculous motley shirts or plaid shirts. Now he was dressed in a strict dark blue suit, white shirt and tie. Alexander said hello and walked over and sat down in the second chair next to John. "What are you doing here?" John frowned even more, then turned to the notary. "What's going on?" "Please calm down," the man replied. "Everything is happening strictly in accordance with the will your late father expressed, and I have been instructed by him, as his lawyer and friend, to do the following. The fact is, about 25 years ago, your father had an affair." John listened with bated breath. He was basically aware that his father often cheated on his mother. It had eventually led to their divorce years ago, and she had moved far, far away altogether, abandoning her son. She simply said that John was a big boy and she was tired of everything and wouldn't tear him away from his father. That affair was like a fleeting thing. She was just a maid in that house. And then when John's father decided it was time for that fun to end, the woman didn't mind. She only asked to keep her where she was because it was a good job. She never made any claims to John's father. She generally settled her personal life. Married, had a child, divorced. 5 years ago, the woman was diagnosed with oncology and John's father did not leave her until the end, help with medication, treatment. "Why are you telling me all this?" John asked nervously. "I don't understand. And what is he doing here?" John nodded at Alexander, who sat motionless and stared at the portrait of the dead owner of the house and one of the biggest businessmen in the city. "Show a little patience, if you would be so kind. I've come to the most interesting part," Demian replied politely. And then, in a few phrases, he outlined something important. Hearing this, John experienced a real shock. He simply could not believe that it was true. What he heard was that the child born to the maid was his father's child. The woman kept this secret until her death, and John's father, in turn, until his own. He spoke to the son Alexander and was forgiven. He also put him in his will. The last 3 months had been spent preparing all the documents to prove their kinship, as well as legal preparations in case John decided to somehow prevent his brother from getting his share of the inheritance. "No, it's true," the notary interrupted John delicately but firmly and stood up. Alexander stood up after him. "From my position as a person who knows the rules and is familiar with your late father's opinion, I can say that the best solution in this situation is reconciliation. I am not asking you to call me brother." Alexander spoke for the first time. "I do not aspire to be part of your family. I had my own family, but I'm also not going to give up what my father decided to pass on to me." "And why? Why did you work here as a gardener next?" That thought was very preoccupying John now, almost more than any other. "I gave this garden many years," Alexander grinned. "I wanted to give it a proper farewell. Autumn is a good time, by the way. But as of today, I am no longer your gardener, brother. I'm leaving." The door closed behind Alexander. John sat in the chair and looked at the notary. "Is there something you want to ask?" Demian said politely. "How long have you known all this?" "Your father initiated me into everything about 4 months ago, right after he told Alexander about it." "And you've been pretending to be a friend of my family the whole time." John rose from the table. "I did what I was asked to do. And naturally, I have also fulfilled all my obligations in good faith," the notary replied, rising and collecting the papers. "I don't need your services anymore," John spat out. The man was already shaking a little with anger, realizing that he had been deceived cruelly. His own father had not seen fit to reveal to him such an important truth. "Well," Demian nodded, "I had envisioned such a development, but unfortunately, we still have to settle all the questions concerning the inheritance. After that, of course, I will transfer all my affairs to your new lawyer." "Alexander, hello." Angelica called Alexander. It was a surprisingly warm, sunny fall day outside the window. In principle, they had almost finished everything in the garden. Now it remained only to prepare it decently for wintering. This time Alexander answered her with a friendly voice as always, and the girl smiled, sighed with relief. It meant that she was worried that he had something wrong or that something had broken up in their relationship. Angelica asked about when they would do the garden next, but Alexander said they wouldn't be doing that anymore. "What do you mean?" Angelica asked, confused. He answered that other people would take care of preparing the garden for winterization. And in the spring, he can say for sure they will not work together there too at all. But why? We better talk about this over the phone. Can I pick you up? We can have dinner together. Well, actually, to tell you the truth, Angelica didn't feel like going out tonight. Why don't you just come to my place? Okay, Alexander agreed. He came, as always, not empty-handed, but with flowers and a treat. This time it was a box of chocolate-covered fruit. I have something to tell you, said Alexander. I'm listening. Angelica smiled warmly. They sat at the table in the small kitchen. The overhead light was out. The darkness was dispersed by the lights from the street and a small table lamp with a purple lampshade. Alexander began his story from afar. He remembered his childhood, how his mother had been evasive in answering questions about his father. How he grew up, in fact, in this Stone's mansion because his mother took him to work with no one to leave him with, and he sat quietly in the servants' quarters. Alexander brought his narrative to how a few months ago the old owner of the house confessed to him that he was his father. And then when he was gone, the lawyer gave him the details of the will. Alexander ended his story at a meeting with his brother. I understand that John, he's not guilty of anything. He didn't know. It's not like we grew up together. Alexander grinned. He didn't socialize with the children of the circle of people my mother and I belonged to. We were in different worlds. And the fact that I have money now, you could say that puts me in the circle of people John belongs to. But it doesn't. It doesn't change anything. I just have money now. That's all. I thought so much about what to say to him. And then I realized there's nothing to say. I can't say I understand you. Angelica reached out to him and covered Alexander's hand on the table with her palm and squeezed it lightly, reassuringly. I can only imagine how you feel. But I've been talking to John. At first I thought he was a wonderful man. He decided to help me. And I realize he's not a bad person, but I don't think you two are alike. You're very different. Earlier, Angelica had shared with Alexander the essence of the whole story, when John suddenly decided that making her his fake bride was a great idea. And for some reason, it seemed to Angelica that this act of John in its own way also affected Alexander's attitude to him, because it showed how easily this man is capable of deception for his own benefit. What are you going to do next? Probably buy a house and start growing my own garden. And also, perhaps, now I can do something that I have long wanted to do. I had a dream to create my own plant nursery. That's great. Angelica supported him. I'm sure you'll succeed. There is one more thing. Please close your eyes. I'll just be a minute. Why? It's a surprise. Angelica obeyed. Alexander went out into the corridor. He opened his backpack, which he almost always carried with him, usually storing a lot of necessary things. But today the backpack was almost empty and there was a long box in it. Carefully opening it, Alexander carried what he had so long and excitedly chosen into the kitchen and put it on the table in front of Angelica. Now you can, he said, and the girl opened her eyes. In front of her in a small ceramic pot was a miniature snow-white orchid, and in the upper flower sparkled, like a frozen dewdrop, a diamond. I want you to marry me, Alexander said. Angelica looked at the ring and 1,000 thoughts ran through her mind, and yet there were no thoughts at all. She only felt. It seemed to her that time had stopped and now she had to make the most important decision of her life. And she made it without a doubt. Another 4 months passed. The height of winter was the worst time for fresh flowers, but on this day everything was in them. The banquet hall of the elite restaurant, where the tables for the wedding feast were set, was drowned in a variety of fresh flowers, which were interspersed with silk ribbons and tiny LED lights, and altogether created a background fabulous, candy romantic. It was a modest celebration to which the most important guests for the future young family were invited. Angelica's former classmates, her best friend, and also those 2 doctors and a nurse from the hospital who were present when she woke up after the fire, and 2 other women who were lying with her in the ward. Alexander had invited his friends, as well as Demian, and John and his son had also come. Angelica could have left everything as it was, but she still decided to have a serious talk with Alexander, and in the end, he decided to try to establish a relationship with his brother. John didn't mind it at all. Yes, girlfriend. Who would have thought that such a misfortune would turn out to be such a fairy tale at the end? Sophia, in a candy pink silk bridesmaid dress, approached Angelica. You're just glowing with happiness. I'm married. Angelica laughed. She raised her hand, admiring the platinum engagement ring. Marriage suits you, Sophia smiled. By the way, you could have thrown the bouquet to me. I threw it honestly. Well, who got it? Well, nothing. I'll build my happiness without a bouquet. Sophia winked. You know, this John is not so bad. Yes, he is in principle not such a bad man. I was so surprised when Michael, well, the same business partner with whom I confession I broke the deal, suddenly accepted an invitation to our wedding. Can you imagine? Alexander decided to invite him. I don't know what their deal is. He just decided to buy land from Michael to build his nursery. Wow, how do you know that? Well, Sophia smiled enigmatically. Michael himself told me. We see each other sometimes now. What? Angelica exclaimed. When did you do that? Oh, such an interesting coincidence. Sophia winked at her. We even before you signed, that is, this morning talked. Can you imagine? He said that I am insanely similar to this first love. And since he's a free man now. Angelica nodded. Michael, who was with all his heart for a strong family, was going through a difficult divorce from his wife, who, as it turned out, had been cheating on him for many years. But it seems now he decided to leave the sadness and try again to arrange a personal life. There you are. Alexander approached the girls. Can I take my wife? Oh, so beat it, laughed Sophia and hurried to Michael as her favorite song was playing and she hoped to pull them into a sensual dance. I love you, Alexander said. And I love you, Angelica answered him. Her arms wrapped gently but tenaciously around her husband. How happy she was now. And she had no doubt that there were many thousands of happy days ahead of them. What's wrong with me? It's hard to speak. My throat. Angelica sighed and leaned back on the pillows. Water, please. Her wish was immediately fulfilled by a nurse who introduced herself as Alice, helped her to drink. And then Harvey, the older doctor, spoke. He explained that Angelica had passed out from smoke inhalation and had nearly gotten a concussion after a beam had fallen from the ceiling. But luckily it had hit the back of her head in passing, so it was almost a minor injury. Still, she was admitted to the ICU, from which, thankfully, it was soon decided to transfer her. My hair. It was hardly the right moment to worry about beauty when you'd almost died, but Angelica was terribly concerned for some reason. She had always been proud of her hair and had been growing it out since 4th grade. By the time she was 23, she had gorgeous natural blonde hair up to her waist, thick and silky. No jewelry needed with such wealth. But now, Angelica felt a hollow at the back of her head and at her right temple. There were bandages and she ran her fingers around her head. Where's the hair? Fire, said the second doctor. He looked sympathetic. Most of the length. Don't worry, it will grow back. And suddenly Angelique cried. Bitterly, tearfully, covering her face with her hands, clutching her fingers so tenaciously into it, as if it could ward off what had happened. And after all, nothing foretold trouble. Katie stared at the familiar interior, unchanged since the 80s. Ariana's house is a time capsule. Here you can make movies about Ariana and perestroika without sets. All the achievements of developed socialism are gathered in the old house. Yugoslavian wall crystal, the walls of which did not know drinks and sauces. Color TV, carefully tucked away under a napkin so that the kinescope does not fade. Multicolored carpets thickly covered both floors and walls. But today something had changed. Invisible, intangible, almost indistinguishable. What did you do, Ariana? Vacuumed the giant rug that covers the coldest wall? Cleaned the red floor lamp? Finally got rid of the record player and the records that already have dust on them as thick as a finger? No, the answers were all negative. The change was on some other intangible level. Oh, Kathy, whispered dreamily to Ariana, who looked a dozen years younger. What a man! Oh my God! Oh my God! What did he do? She asked with undisguised curiosity. Tell me already. Not a man, but a wizard. Ariana continued. Not a wizard, but a magician. Are you going to tell me or not? Ariana only rolled her eyes dreamily, no specifics. This intrigued Katie even more. The most daring assumptions arose in her old woman's head. Of course, a man from out of town could do anything. But this one didn't seem to have come back from the far north, but from Washington. And Ariana is, God forgive me, not the freshest. Oh my God. Ariana continued to shake her head. Would you like some liqueur? No, of course not. Grandma waved her hand. You know I don't drink. Then the usual ritual of persuasion began. That was the custom in this house and between old friends. There were various arguments that hadn't changed in decades. Ariana would convince Katie to have a drink, while the other would argue an object. First of all, Ariana said, a natural product is healthy. All doctors recommend 50 drops a day. Oh, Katie parried, believe those doctors more. You know that some of them don't cure but poison. Secondly, Ariana continued, ignoring the arguments, alcohol in small quantities allows you to relax, sleep. At our age, it's important and you won't have to take pills. You realize that I have no problem with sleep, answered her old friend. Sometimes I fall asleep so much that I can't get up. I can hardly open my eyes. And thirdly, Ariana smiled, if you don't have a drink with me, I won't tell you what Harvey did last night. Katie wanted to agree as it was, but the new argument added some intrigue to their long-standing ritual. The grandmothers had a complete division of roles and responsibilities. Ariana made wonderful maluka on cherries, currants, gooseberries, strawberries, grape seeds, and other non-obvious fruits. Kathy was a huge tea expert. She had an arsenal of different types of this beverage in her kitchen set. All right, Katie exhaled. One of each. That's it, isn't it? One at a time, Ariana shrugged. She was well aware that their lunches were never limited to the minimum dose. Help me set up. God, what a man, what a man. Katie was burning with curiosity. What had this young man from out of town done to her friend? Look at her. She's 10 years younger. Her gait had become firmer, and now she could playfully be called a grandmother instead of an old lady. And after all, she was going to die last week, even found out the cost of the coffin and funeral services. Why are you sitting there? Ariana's frightened voice brought Katie out of her slumber. Come on, raise your hand. Say your name. I'm fine, the old lady said. I haven't had a stroke. I'm just thinking, what are we going to drink our liquor with? You know what, with marmalade, remember? Ariana hesitantly reached into her bag. The bag of sweets was there. According to their long-standing ritual, she brought marmalade slices, the kind sold in the collapsed USSR. That union had swallowed up not only their youth, but also their life guidelines. It would seem that in the 30 years since the signing of the agreements, new goals and values could have been discovered. But the old ladies lived in the past. Hence this interior frozen in time and rituals that have not changed over the years. Oh, how good, Ariana said, savoring her prune liqueur. Can you taste that noble flavor? Like when Brezhnev was in power. Yes, Katie agreed, but she drank the first shot in one gulp out of habit. It was a nice giddy feeling, as if she'd get an advance tomorrow. You know how to make something delicious out of nothing, just like under Gorbachev. That's just the way it is, nodded the neighbor. Kathy and Ariana are old ladies, dandelions of God. The former has a dog, a family member, the latter a cheeky cat. Kathy once had a husband and a son, but both were taken away by the fate of the villain. Now she lived out her life alone, clinging to the past with all her might. Ariana had a husband and a beautiful daughter. The daughter went to study in the Czech Republic and therein established herself. For her sake, Ariana had to learn the internet, but the signal in the village was unstable. The other day my daughter called me. Ariana shared the happy news. Imagine, she's pregnant. That's it. I was already afraid that I would not live to see this happy moment. If only I would have a year to live, to see the hair, pregnant. Katie said with ill-concealed envy, she's not pregnant, for God's sake. She's only 35. Ariana exclaimed. Life is just beginning, as they say. She says she's going to have a baby, by herself. Congratulations, her friend said, but not sincerely, furtively wiping away a tear. Katie thought that the only person other than the mailman with whom she kept in touch might not have been so saddened by the news. Her son, alas, had left no offspring. And then, as soon as Katie was ready to go, she'd be the end of the line. I wish I could feel happy before I die, just once. Listen, Ariana, said the old woman. So what did that rascal do to you yesterday? I don't know how to tell you. Ariana smiled. It's awkward. If you don't know, then there's something to say. Come on, ease your soul, Tony. Oh, of course there is something to tell, Ariana exclaimed. My God, such a man, such a man. Come on, don't bore me. All right, Ariana showed leniency, but I'll have a second one, just to loosen tongues. All right, Katie nodded. This time she didn't even play the usual ritual of persuasion, which earned her a puzzled look from her friend. Curiosity was getting the better of her. Rumors about Harvey had already spread throughout the village. He specialized in old ladies. Maybe she, Sabrina, should try her luck? So listen, Ariana said dreamily. I'm sitting, not touching anyone. A while ago in the auto shop, I smiled luck. Such a beef bones picked up a beauty. I'm making cold cuts. Want to see? Enough of this nonsense, Katie shouted and covered her mouth with her hand, frightened. Ariana's eyebrows rose to her forehead. They hadn't raised their voices at each other in this house in years. Nothing could mar their friendship. Neither sorrow, nor joy, nor inflation and devaluation. And here, so, envy her friend. Well, let her suffer some more. Let her be patient, while she, Ariana, tells me in detail about her adventures. Oh, you impatient girl. Ariana smiled and pinched her friend under the rib. She gave a funny yelp and twitched. Look how the blood plays, the way it's bubbling. I'm sorry, Katie waved her hand. Something came over me. You know, once in 100 years, a grandmother shoots. Okay, Ariana waved her hand. Where was I? So I'm sitting there, building my legs. He walks in with all the gallantry in the world. What do you think he was holding in his beautiful hands? Harvey's head was falling apart like the Soviet Union in the 90s. The pain of falling from the very top of the social order to the sinful earth seemed unbearable. Just yesterday, he was a deputy, appeared on federal channels and influenced the state agenda. And today, he is literally thrown overboard in political life. He has to give up all benefits and privileges, take a step back. And all for what? Some poor animal that he had the misfortune to. Why did I go into that forest? Harvey wailed, rubbing his temples. I could have gone to Turkey like a man, or the Philippines. But no, patriot, God forgive me. A meeting with a political technologist named Harry was scheduled for 10 o'clock in the morning. He was already waiting in the guest house, where the former deputy usually held talks. Looking at the luxurious government summer house, Harvey felt wistful. He would have to vacate this nest in the very near future. For good? Good morning, Harry said obligingly. I'd had 2 cups of coffee already waiting for you. The political technologist had a strange habit of translating time into non-obvious objects. The flight was delayed by 5 cigarettes. Anyone had to strain their wits to translate cigarettes, cups of coffee, or capitals into minutes and hours. But Harry still had more advantages than disadvantages. Most importantly, he never failed. His thinking was ahead of time, like a jet airplane traveling faster than the speed of sound. Hi, replied Zero, taking a seat in the chair. Listen, I'm sorry about my appearance. I was working with documents all night last night. You know, last day. It was necessary to properly shake out the archive, so as not to pull anything with myself. I see, smiled the political technologist. But Harvey, why keep these papers in your hands? The whole world has long ago switched to digital. It's time to give up paper decisively and irrevocably. What he meant, the ex-deputy did not understand, but nodded just in case. He looked at his interlocutor through the veil of headache. Expensive watch, stylish shoes and pants. Also the stupid beard that aged him. But I guess it was fashionable now, or he wanted to look older than his years. I'm a total failure, Harvey exhaled. I'm no longer an MP. I saw it on the news, Harry nodded. But it's not the end of the world. I'm beginning to feel like my whole life has been wasted, the politician continued. Everything I've dreamed of, everything I've thought about, it's all slipping out of my hands. Even this summer house. These are temporary difficulties, the political technologist said firmly. At the right moment, his voice went from subservient to commanding. Your name is in the news so much now that it could well be converted into victory. The word fell to the floor of the guest house with a terrible clatter. That's not something you say out loud here. So Harry was so confident in his abilities that he was even willing to break the unwritten rules. His cheerfulness passed to the former deputy and his mind cleared. Now he too was ready to act. In victory over what? Harvey asked. The confident voice of his interlocutor made him feel better, and even his headache became less. The gubernatorial election is coming up, Harry whispered. In your hometown. Oh, the southern capital. It wasn't the biggest city on the map of his homeland, but it was also very important. After all, it was from there that he started his way into the big political sport. It's where he got his first ranking and his first professional injuries. But can you win where the real political heavyweights are against you? And they're bound to come around. Do you really think I have a chance of winning? Harvey asked suspiciously. Yes, Harry nodded. But you got to work. You got to work. So that the electorate can see your determination and assertiveness. Your best qualities. Harvey stood up and paced the room in excitement. The headache was gone. It must have been the adrenaline, excitement, and anticipation of future victory that worked better than aspirin. He even saw the slogan of the election campaign. You asked me to come back. There's nothing to do in the capital. There's plenty to do back home. And who needs this Washington? It's a sleepy kingdom. No movement, only construction. We need a strategy, said the former deputy with excitement, so that I don't get shot down early in the process. Harry smiled and, like a magician, pulled a folder out of his sleeve. Harvey could have sworn it hadn't been there a second ago. Political technologists were like magicians to him, though, and he preferred not to pry into their inner workings. The draft strategy was written 2 nights ago, Harry said proudly. I just called it return on demand. Fools think alike, Harvey said with surprise. I beg your pardon, the political strategist clarified. Nothing. I'm telling you, the idea was literally in the air. It just popped into my head, and who should ask me to come back? The simplest people, Harry said firmly. The simpler the better. You do realize that the United States is not made up of billionaires and influencers. Nonsense, Harvey waved his hand. Nobody's gonna listen to them. Simple people are simple. Remember Gokul with his The Overcoat. That's where the little man is described. Harry smiled. Like Harvey, he was well versed in literature. He liked the comparison with Mickey. He had thought of it himself. Small people, however, could do great things if the human mass reached a critical level. I'm telling you seriously, the political technologist persuaded him. The electorate has a demand for downshifting among the elites. Did you just call me a downer? Harvey was indignant. By the way, I didn't want to get into this robe deer story at all. Downshifting is about getting back to your roots. To the roots, explained the political technologist, not paying attention to the interlocutor's remarks. Simplification. Only in the US it means living for the region, not for the capital. I still don't understand anything, Harvey exhaled, although the idea came to him. Explain it with an example, please. Well, you leave your club apartment, in this case a government dacha. Then, you settle in the simplest housing, for example, in Khrushchevka. You take the subway and communicate with the voter. Immerse yourself not only in his problems, but in life itself. I'm not going to a condo. Harvey recalled with horror the experience of living in such an apartment. Cold walls, leaky windows, perpetually wet pipes. And if there are insects running from the neighbors, you can go crazy. No, if we're going to give up comfort, it's got to be somewhere outside the crowded cities. I suggest downshifting in the countryside. Harry smiled, as if reading his thoughts. We'll launch a campaign for a deputy in exile. They say, voluntarily gave up all benefits and privileges, chopping firewood, picking Colorado potato beetles off potatoes. Dives not to the bottom of life, but in the thick of it, and we'll save up the response. And when it reaches the mass we need, we will announce our participation in the gubernatorial elections. Said Harvey. It's an interesting idea, but I see a catch in it. Suddenly, the national anthem played loudly in the room, and Harvey and Harry jumped up from their seats, out of habit or instinct. Katie tried for the second day in a row to find an explanation for the transformation of the village. Was it really about this visitor, or as her grandmother called him, the return? He'd been here before, a long time ago, as a young boy. He'd been on TV later. She remembered him right away. Katie's memory for faces was excellent. But why he'd been on TV, she didn't. Where had he been for so many years? Maddie, Katie begged, tell me what he did to you. I won't leave you alone. Oh, Kathy, said the old woman rudely. All you want to know is like that Miss Marple from the TV series. Who? Katie asked and crossed herself just in case. She preferred not to watch foreign soap operas. You know, the old detective, the villager explained. I don't have time to talk to you. I've got pigs to feed, poultry to clean. But Harvey, of course. Did I tell you I was interviewed later? Maddie rolled her eyes dreamily, and envy gripped Katie's throat with steely fingers. Why were they lucky and she wasn't? She had to find out what this city returnee was doing in their village. And she'll be interviewed later too. So I'll help, Katie smiled. I'll help with the pigs and the poultry, and you can tell me all about it. Of course you will, Maddie said admonishingly. That's why you came to visit me, and then we'll make pancakes together. With our teeth, what else is there to chew? Katie couldn't stand that active old lady. At 67, Maddie still kept a huge household. It wasn't uncommon for her to invite her friends over for a sit-down tea. But in reality, to participate in her agricultural battles in the stable or in the field. Maddie could hire people, but she didn't like that. Close and distant friends, of which there were 100 in the village, were another matter. What do I feed the pigs? Maddie asked, as if she couldn't see her friend's gaze of excitement. Bread. It's expensive, but I've got to deal with Barry. The one who runs the store, Katie said with interest. Barry is a prominent man. In his 60s, he was divorced for the 6th time and was again the most promising groom in the village. Yeah, smiled Maddie, my old companion. Anyway, he gives me all the bread they don't take away. The bread and the loaf. I slice it up, soak it in water, and feed it to the pigs. Follow me. Katie, in her old age, preferred cozy gatherings with Ariana, with a little Naluka. But the trouble was, yesterday she told me exactly what Harvey had done to her. She said something about an interview too. And the next morning, Katie forgot all about it like a blackout. As they say, the third drink was too much. And now she needed to find out what this returnee was doing to the old ladies and why they were lining up for him. And I said to Kalinka, suddenly switched Maddie, why do you come to us one by one? Wouldn't I have gathered a dozen at once and made everyone happy at once? You can do it, I tell you. Just like that. Intrigued, Katie tried to remember what Ariana had told her yesterday, but her memory refused to help. That's what she said, nodded Maddie. Why are you cutting the bread so big? Make it smaller. They're pigs, not bears. Now we're talking. Get the hose, we'll soak the bread. Dumping the slices into the troughs, Katie went to the gate. It was good that Maddie had a hose so she wouldn't have to carry water by hand. The hose was on the ground, and the old woman had to bend down to pick it up. Maddie nimbly, despite her age, put on the nozzle and selected the rain mode. Her lips moved, but the water from the hose absorbed the sounds. There he is, she said, on top of him. And I say, no, I can't do that. He came from the side. He has a beautiful singing voice. I can't hear anything. Katie screamed. She was terribly curious about what the returnee had been doing to that old lady yesterday. From the side, from above. When the water softened the bread, Maddie opened the stable and the pigs raced to the troughs. One of them caught Katie and she almost fell to the ground. She held on. The pigs chomped on the bread and in a few minutes had eaten everything they were supposed to. They started licking the troughs. Look at the backs. She began to brag, stroking the pigs lovingly. That's what a loin will be. And the scapular part? Just like in the textbook. You're boring me, Maddie. Katie exhaled. I need a rest. Go on then to tea, said Maddie. And then after tea, we'll do the bird, God willing. Katie sincerely hoped God would spare her this time. At her age, such exercise had brought nothing but pain in her lower back. She would never have gone to Licka's house if it hadn't been for curiosity. Maddie's tea was scalding hot even in her hands. So while Maddie sipped from her mug, Kathy sipped on her drink. Something's making me feel heavy, she whispered. Shall I lie down? Of course, answered her friend fearfully. Why does it hurt? Did I kill you? No, it's fine, Katie said, stepping into the only living room. It's all right, old girl. At her age, lying down in the middle of the day is the order of the day. Young people don't have that luxury. Young boys and girls have a million things to do. They don't even have time to sit down. Katie trudged back to her bedroom, with Matey wailing next to her. She was already embarrassed that she'd called her friend to help. "Don't worry about it. I'll just lie down for 5 minutes and it'll go away," Katie said. She walked into the bedroom, saw the bed and the nightstand, and it all made sense to her in a flash. "You old," Semyonovna hissed and went at Madi, raising her hand. She crossed herself and shouted loudly, calling for help. But no one heard her. The national anthem of the United States was on Harvey's cell phone with only one number displayed. Colleagues called it his employer, but the former lawmaker considered it merely an intermediary between him and the people. He didn't expect a call so soon. He hoped to rest for another week. "Will you vacate the dacha as agreed?" the voice asked. "Or have you already called the television and the support group, and are you going to build barricades?" "Has agreed," Harvey said rudely. He saw Harry making signs and said, "I got a second line." "I got line 2. Just a second," he said, and turned off the microphone. "It's them, isn't it?" the political strategist whispered. "It's them." "Don't whisper." I turned the sound off. Harvey whispered back. "Something to say?" "Yes." Harry nodded his head. "Turn on the speakerphone and say to the camera that you're going to the country. That you'll never need this cottage again." "Just a second. I'll put the phone on." "That's it. Action." Harvey straightened up, fixed his hair, cleared his throat. He turned on the microphone, and with it, the speakerphone. "Smony?" he asked in a deliberately rough voice. "I have already told you, and do not ask me to stay at this dacha and write memoirs to your tune. Never and never, do you hear?" What? The frightened voice on the other end of the wire trembled. "Do you feel bad?" "I'm fine," shouted Harvey. "I feel great. I'm going away. I'm going to the country. I'm going to spend the rest of my life working with the electorate in the field. I'm going to get up at 6 in the morning, shoveling snow, giving lectures." Then the former MP saw Harry shake his head. "I'm going to teach the kids lessons." "Harvey, is everything all right?" His voice was completely disoriented. "If we have to, the cottage can be delivered a week late." "Not a day later," the former deputy cut me off. "My last word tomorrow, and that's it." "That's it. I don't have time. The people are waiting. See you soon." Harvey spent a long time in his head selecting an offensive word that could be used to call his interlocutor. Traitor? Probably not. He's lying. Crook? Not proven. Bribe taker? Never been caught. Finally, Harvey just hung up the phone and looked at Harry. He turned off the camera and gave him a thumbs up. "That's a good start," he said. "You're not the ones getting kicked out. You're the one who's leaving. You voluntarily resigned, didn't you?" "Of course," nodded the former deputy. He remembered a long and detailed conversation with one of the most senior officials in the country. The voluntary resignation was possible thanks to their agreement. "Tomorrow we will meet and discuss the details of our campaign. You're ready to win, right?" Harvey spent the rest of the day packing his things. He had accumulated a lot of things over the years of living in this country house, which he habitually called the country house. Gifts from his travels, memorabilia. Here, for example, a large African drum. A gift from colleagues from South Africa or Congo. What a thing. "I'll give it to an orphanage," Harvey thought. Or a giant traffic wand. 2 meters high, it looked like a wizard's staff or a stick of Santa Claus. He was given this trinket by the head of the traffic police on his anniversary. Must have given it to him. "The thing is stained and bulky. You can't give it to an orphanage. You can't take it with you. I decided to leave it for his successor, who will live in this luxurious house." By morning, everything was packed. Most of all boxes with things and appliances had to go to 2 homes for children and the elderly. Harvey took relatively little with him, only what would fit in the Neva. Some things he decided to mail to his former colleagues. Let them choke on it anyway. He doesn't need a Parker pen or a mahogany device anymore. At exactly 10 o'clock, the political technologist arrived again. This time he was brought in. "Are you resting at all?" Harvey asked him. "We have no time to rest," Harry parried with a smile. "Let's go quickly to discuss the details of the plan. There's not a minute to lose." Seated in the guest house, the 2 men resembled Anthony and Lucy discussing a battle plan with the Whites. Only it was the younger man acting as strategist and the older man listening intently. Harry spread out a folder, and in it were the results of surveys, some charts, a visual style. So, Operation Comeback, said the political strategist. The goal is to become the head of. Don't say it out loud, Harvey asked. You know there might be ears. Head of the village, period. For his experiment, Harry chose a huge village in the area they were interested in. The name was poetic. It had once been a thriving village with manufacturing and life. A school, a dispensary, and a dozen stores remained. Ruthless urbanization has not left the settlement a chance to become something other than a place for recreation of townspeople. According to the documents, the population is almost 3,000 people. The political technologist brought him up to speed. In fact, only dacha owners and pensioners live here. More precisely, pensioners. There are 1,000 of them here, according to the most modest estimates. Wow, Harvey whistled. What a skewed demographic. What about the men? Heart, blood pressure, bad habits, Harry shrugged. The men are sweating, so you'll be in a fishbowl. The cameraman writes nonstop, writes everything, and then we pick out the right bits. An interviewer follows you around the village. Quiet hour, when the cameras are off from 10 to 6. Just like, thought Harvey, but said nothing aloud. He needs to completely change his demeanor. Not to argue, not to denounce, but to listen more, and never use obscene words. The cameras will remember everything. If you see a cameraman or an engineer, ignore him, Harry continued. That means they've come to interview another grandmother, set up equipment or check something. They won't answer your questions, just pretend they don't exist. Where are you taking me? Thought the former MP, but the excitement had already taken over. What's our goal? The goal is to win over the elderly electorate, replied Harry. To win their hearts and sympathies. To get them to literally look you in the mouth. What will I do to attract them? Harvey asked. What can I do to help them? I have an idea, Harry said, and smiled slyly. But I don't know if you'll like it. Katie finally came to her senses. She was lying on the couch in her home, like a living organism. At a certain point in its life, it was constantly growing, doubling in size, adding new rooms, bristling with pipes and satellite dishes. Then she was suddenly widowed and left all alone. The growth of the house stopped. Now, of all the rooms, Kathy used only 2. The kitchen, where she met guests, and the bedroom. This is not a house, but a barracks, she heard a beautiful voice. Who's there? The old woman asked, frightened. We met. A man stood on the threshold of the room. Have you forgotten? No, Katie answered, although the face was completely unfamiliar. She tried to stand upright. I never forget anything, young man. She was embarrassed by her memory, which was failing her every now and then. Since they had met, she had to reason logically. Who was this man? I'd like to think a doctor, but no. No suitcase, no hurry in his movements, no condescending attitude to patients. Maybe a new district doctor. Unlikely, too old, and you can't see the shape. So it's this. The only thing, I forgot my patronymic, complained the old woman. The whole village is talking about you, young man, and I've lost track of your name. Harvey, he replied with a smile. You can just call me Harvey. I like to be addressed by my first name. Oh no, not at all, Katie objected. There's no such thing as a slight, and there can't be, especially not with a man like that. Well, yes, agreed the guest. You were ill, remember? I walked you home. Ariana asked me to. I couldn't refuse a woman like that. Katie was embarrassed for the second time. What happened at Maddie's house? They'd had a fight, but the subject wasn't obvious. Oh yeah, a month ago she lost a book, a volume of Bulgakov's White Guard. Then Maddie had called her a senile person who couldn't remember the simplest things. And today she found the book in her friend's bedroom and lost control of herself. Mutual reproaches, scolding, and even abuse, Katie still remembered. But what happened next? Where did this handsome man come from? He looked about 40 or so. He's still young. She knew at 69 that 40 was the prime of life. Are you feeling all right? Harvey asked. Shouldn't we call a doctor? No, son, sighed Kathy. Who feels all right at that age? Rheumatism, blood pressure, sugar, it's all getting worse. And sometimes, just the weather makes my joints ache. And it's so depressing, like in Uncle Fyodor, remember? Your paws ache, your tail falls off. And she began to list her illnesses for a long time, confessing to a stranger as if to a priest. Then she switched to internal problems. a small pension, a meager choice of food in the grocery store, an interesting series on TV, and even those go on the third round. At some point, Katie realized that her guest was waiting for something. And for the umpteenth time that day, she was embarrassed. "Oh, I'm sorry, son," she wailed. "Standing there like an intruder, I didn't even offer you a seat." "It's all right," the man replied. "You better show me where the light is." "Light?" The old woman was surprised. "There's light everywhere, thank God. Or do you mean the light bulb? Well, there it is, pull the string." "Oh, I'm sorry, I was complaining about my illnesses in life. I feel better now. I'm all right, actually." "Well," Harvey said, "if you're feeling better, we can get started." "Start what?" Kathy asked, startled. "What do you mean?" Harvey was astonished. "Why you invited me here? You said it was all the talk of the village, and that you wanted to join in. What did I say?" "I didn't dare say no." "I wish I could remember the details," sighed the old woman, "but I'm very interested, really. Believe me, for 2 days I almost did not sleep, just thinking about it. And to be interviewed afterwards, yes." "Well," said the man, "if everyone's talking, we should try it. What do you like, the classics or the newer stuff?" Harvey had recently turned 47. He didn't consider himself an old man. The fire of youth was always beating in his heart, the light of which was reflected in his eyes. Lately, he had lost a bit of weight. His hair had turned gray, wrinkles appeared, and his teeth began to ache. Now he preferred baths, healthy sleep, and good food. The countryside had all that, so Harry's thought was fertile ground. The more Harvey ran the story of this fall through his mind, the more he felt sorry for himself. How did he, an experienced politician, end up in such a stalemate? First, he'd hit a roe deer on the road. Then, obeying some primitive instinct, he cut it up and loaded the best pieces into the car. Out of nowhere, police officers, wildlife inspectors, and reporters showed up. He was good at some things, too. First of all, he was caught doing something inappropriate not in some expensive resort, but in the remote Siberian forest. Secondly, he was driving not an expensive foreign car, but a budget off-road vehicle Niva. In the third place, he did not deny anything and did not refuse to confess guilt, which later allowed him to avoid criminal responsibility. "Kayana is the village of my youth," he told the political technologist when they were driving on bumpy roads to the goal. "That's where my professional life began. After a brilliant defense of my diploma work, I was sent to work in the village on assignment. Oh, how I resented it. I dreamed of diplomatic work, traveling, and they told me so sharply, lawyers are needed in the countryside too." "I know," Harry smiled. "Before I prepared the campaign, I studied your biography very carefully." "Oh, it doesn't say everything," said Harvey. "I like Kiana. I still don't know why farm businesses need lawyers, though. They put me behind the wheel of a dump truck a week later. That's what they wrote on my employment history, part-time driver." "I read about that," nodded the political technologist, "and about your fateful interview in '95. "I know all about it, Harvey. That very speech was broadcast on all federal channels. The governor, his entourage, the big boys, the press. They happened to run into Harvey, who was trying to change a shock absorber on his dump truck. From the very beginning of the interview, the journalist heard something very different from what he expected, but he was satisfied with the result. "Do you remember how I slashed at you back then?" Harvey asked. "They said that the country had collapsed. Now it's different. Now the country is reviving." The political technologist remained meaningfully silent, and the former deputy recalled his emotional speech. How he denounced the Democrats and their entourage for not being able to curb prices or send a normal shock absorber. How he put the big boss in his place, almost a celestial. "Who are you so verbose?" the governor asked then, pressing his lips together unhappily. "Lawyer driver?" "Me," Harvey replied menacingly. "I'm a lawyer, and if necessary, I'm a driver, and if my country needs me, I'm a mechanic, and a mechanic. And no one can stop me, not a single corrupt man." This contemptuous "who will you be" cost the governor his post. He just wasn't voted in anymore. Harvey, on the other hand, went up. He got a job in the diplomatic service. Then he was elected to parliament. After some more time, he got acquainted with political technologists and began to work with them in order to exclude the element of surprise from his political life. And it, as they say, took place. While we're driving, let's go over the important points, Harry said. No alcohol, no tobacco. In the picture, only healthy lifestyle, proper nutrition, help. I got it. Harvey waved his hand. I'm done. It's just been a long time since I've had an excuse. And don't forget, we are interested in old ladies, continued the political technologist. They're the first ones we need to win over, at any cost. They will be interviewed. Grandmothers love it. Well, you are like a parrot, by God, grinned the former deputy. You repeat the same thing to me 100 times. Do you think I have no memory? It's just that, you see, the target audience is not easy, said Harry. We know it's hard to talk to old people. Hard and not always pleasant. That depends. The truth is, Harvey really liked grandmothers. It all came from his childhood. He was a late child, born when his mom was well into her 40s. There were hardly ever any young girls or boys in their house, but there were plenty of women of balsamic age. The house Harry had chosen was a solid 4 on a 5-point scale. It had everything he needed for life: a gas stove, a toilet, and a good bed. But for some reason, the shower room was outside. But there was an excellent sauna, without which Harvey could not imagine life. What could be better than a steam that could penetrate to the bones? Harry's plan, of course, was a bit adventurous, but in this sort of thing, it was a win or lose situation. Either he'd really be reborn in this village, or his political career would be lost forever. Harvey just needed to be himself, but a better version of himself. He crossed himself and walked into the house, breathing in the smell of the backwoods. Even a village as large as Cayana was full of rumors. They spread much faster than news on the telegram feeds. And at the level of exclusivity, they could well do honor to the most informed sources. That morning, Lydia had to feed the animals twice as fast as usual. The way to the house of an old acquaintance was about a kilometer, and there was no time to lose. As always, the gate and the gates were securely locked. I come in peace, she shouted with laughter. But the landlady did not react to the humor for some reason. There was not a shadow of a smile on her face. She came, she replied colorlessly. If you leave, no one will be offended. Not me. Did you hear what Katie did last night? Maddie asked, standing on the doorstep of a familiar house. The way she threw herself at me, huh? I heard, Ariana nodded. What are you doing here? I wasn't even going to let you on the doorstep. Why not? The villager was indignant. The resentment came over her like a cold shower. Ariana, we've known each other since childhood, and suddenly you say such insulting things. You might steal something from me, Ariana said. She was very sensitive about property. If she lent money or things to anyone, she made a note of it in a huge book. The news that Maddie had treacherously stolen a volume of The White Guard once again strengthened her confidence that there are no friends in life, only allies. Oh, and you too. Maddie flung out her hands. Well, I forgot about this book. Who can forget? It is Clark can forget. Shook her head Ariana. And you, Maddie, never forget anything. As if I didn't know. Resentment came over Maddie. She had come to Nina as an umpire, an advocate, but she saw a real prosecutor or even a judge. Imagine that. Surely she should be the one to accuse and judge, not Ariana, since that was her fate. But now Maddie couldn't help her dislike for this woman who had so unfairly wronged and humiliated her. Come on, Ariana, let's make up, the old woman suggested. At our age, it's too late to quarrel. Soon we'll have to justify ourselves to God anyway. I didn't quarrel, Ariana shrugged her shoulders. Do you have all or nothing? Oh, you? Maddie was indignant. Help me, I came for help. Help me to explain to Katie what a stupid thing I've done. Am I to be known as a thief in the whole village? There's only one person who can help you, Ariana shrugged, and you know his name well. By the way, he treats me better. Maddie said defiantly. I gave him a top-class idea, so that he wouldn't just visit one old lady, but many of them, a dozen. Oh, you bore me, old woman, said Ariana, turning and strolling back into the lot. She heard her former friend shouting and turned around against her will. A car was speeding down the country road too fast for their area. It had flashing beacons on the cab. There could be no mistake, and it was heading toward the house Harvey rented. Follow him? Maddie shouted with fear. Look, they're after him. "What are you standing there for, old girl?" Ariana exclaimed. "We got to act now, do you hear me? Now?" Billy's office could be characterized in a few words: modest but tasteful. Lack of finances always had to be disguised. Of course, being chairman of the Kayana village government wasn't his dream. But he's only 40 years old. They'll notice him, they'll praise him. They will take him to work first in the Moscow region and then in the capital. It is only necessary to wait for his hour. Things were going well. There were fewer and fewer justified appeals every year, and the flow of complaints was getting weaker. Not that the old ladies were happy with Billy. It was just that they'd already noticed that looking to the village government for help wasn't a good idea. And rightly so. The head himself was in no hurry to prowl around the village and solve other people's problems. As they say, initiative is punishable, and he has already seen it in the career trajectories of his colleagues. "Head, you paged me?" Carlo, head of the police station, showed up at the door. "He did," Billy nodded. The policeman was calling his position by its proper title, and he'd already waved goodbye. After all, being a head didn't hurt at all. "Come in, sit down. I have a question." "What, from the capital?" Carlo smiled. "Are you afraid of the authorities?" Things were going well in the village until this former deputy wandered in. He would have settled in Kayana, gone fishing and picked mushrooms for God's sake. But no, he organized some kind of endless series that was gaining views on YouTube. And instead of a set, it was his, Billy's, settlement. Instead of actors, it's grandmothers talking about how much fun they had with Harvey Sergeyevich. "Why are you smiling?" he asked the policeman angrily. "I got a call from Washington the other day. They called and explained it to me. And I'm not laughing, you know. And you're gonna stop laughing now." Carlo adjusted his black tie. It was a piece of clothing that had seen better days, stained and wrinkled. The policeman kept forgetting who was boss in Kayana, and the head of the administration had to remind him. "He lives and lives," Carlo shrugged. "Doesn't break the law, no propaganda, or whatever the right word is." "Are you sure?" Billy asked. "Are you sure about that?" "There have been no complaints or appeals," the policeman answered on duty, "and we have no reason to react. And we have to be proactive," Comrade Colonel Billy said, "so that we don't get any complaints, so that we don't get complaints." Carlo was silent. He had enough to do. There were constant burglaries from empty houses in the village. Fortunately, there hadn't been any more serious crimes for years. Men were almost extinct in the village, and the grandmothers were not known for their criminal behavior. Only if someone came to their village and started touring, but that was rare. "Have you looked on the internet?" Billy asked. "Did you see what they're showing our Kayana?" "Of course I have," Carlo smiled. "It's a beautiful place, isn't it?" "Then tell me something," continued the head of the settlement, not noticing the remark. "How did they set up all this activity under your nose?" Carlo once again adjusted his shabby tie. He didn't like the tone of the conversation. And who was he to pry into business? Who knows what they're up to? "Head, I repeat, these immigrants do not break the law. Filming themselves quietly," said the policeman. "It's an amateur movie, but it'll do. And in the lead role is not just anyone there, but a big man, an MP. I'm only 3 years away from retirement, you know. I don't want to be promoted to inspector again." "Former deputy," the chairman corrected him. "And you know who can demote you. An ex-deputy helps women," Carlo continued. "What's criminal about it?" The men were silent. The head of the administration began to doubt. "Really, what can we charge this gas stroller? He's obviously here for a purpose. But what purpose? And is it acceptable to act rudely, to break into his house, to ask questions?" Perhaps he would have waited a little longer, as he usually did. But those who give orders are hardly patient. "What's he doing with those broads?" Billy asked grudgingly. "Why'd they come out so happy?" "Agents reported," Carlos said conspiratorially. "He's a very interesting guy. Can you imagine? He's got his mouth on them." But the policeman was prevented from finishing by a phone call. Billy looked at the numbers, but immediately put a smile on his face, as if it were a medical mask that had almost grown on his body during the pandemic. "Jack's at the machine listening," he said. "Work in progress." "Yes, that's right. Yeah, we got it. No, we're not going to sit back." "Yes, we are. Looking at the viewing statistics, Harry rubbed his hands together. He belonged to the new wave of political technologists, and therefore did not recognize authorities and rules. Strictly speaking, a plan for a new election campaign had long ago matured in his head. The main idea was not to understand the team's plan until the last minute. Then the idea would not be detected by the competitors, and they would not be able to bypass or sink the main figure. You don't have to play by the rules, you have to make them up, Harry said, sipping a hookah. You don't break rules, you make new ones. No one likes a loser, but winners are easy and pleasant to talk to. All he needed was a good man in a bad situation. Like a lawmaker who lost his mandate over something stupid. Harvey was perfect for that role. The Roe Deer hit-and-run story was a huge scandal. Harvey had to part with a decent amount of money, compensating for the damage to nature, and also make a donation to the fund for the protection of wildlife. But even that didn't save him. Seeing him in despair, Harry realized it is necessary to act. And now YouTube enriched with a strange series in which the politician lived the most ordinary life imaginable. The first old lady herself fell into Harvey's net, saw the newcomers and came to get acquainted here the ex-deputy and showed his skill. The fame went around the village, and the grandmothers lined up to join the beautiful. The main intrigue is what he does with old ladies. Why in a matter of days they began to queue up to invite Harvey to visit them. Harry was editing the 5th installment. The pace of work was fantastic. After the successful projects of previous years, he had some capital and room for experimentation. He had already had to turn down 2 tempting offers to continue working with the return. There's more to come. Dear friends, said the announcer with a pleasant voice, whom Harry had engaged to read the voiceover. It's been a week since our ex-deputy descended from the Moscow heavens to the southern land. He has an ambitious task, to get into every house, to hear and understand every resident. Harry wrinkled his nose. No, it didn't cling. It's too sweet, like watching television. You can't get views with that kind of text. You need intrigue. You need life itself. You need bitterness and spice. What to put into the mouth of the announcer? The political technologist began to think. Perhaps we need to add expression. Add life. He wrote another message, and in half an hour the announcer sent a new recording. The pitch was different, aggressive, and a bit scandalous. Why did the former deputy give up a well-fed life for Kyan? Why are local grandmothers lining up to be alone with him? It's simple. He wants to see real life without gloss and falseness. Can he not only find himself on the southern soil 20 years later, but also help the most defenseless citizens of the U.S. pensioners, giving them a little happiness? Harry rubbed his temples. Well, that's much better. You have to walk a very fine line. On the one hand, to collect a lot of views, and on the other hand, to attract the viewer. At a time when everyone was turning their backs on the ex-deputy, Harry offered his help, and he did not fail. In the future, when they win, Harvey will not forget this kindness, and this political technologist was convinced. But now it is necessary to act without regard to personal time. Since Harry worked without a budget, he could not hire a large team, only those who were willing to work almost for free. What does he do with grandmothers? Harry was writing a synopsis for a new series. We read dozens of different versions, up to the most mystical and fantastical. The answer is simple. He makes them happy. Find out more in the new series right now. Subscribe, like, and click the bell. The cameras had to be monitored by myself. It's not a dusty job. You had to look at the picture, noting any unusual moments. Now Harry looked lazily at the monitors. No way. It seemed that a new storyline had emerged in their series about the deputy's exile. Could it be? What's that car parked outside the house? Suddenly, the political technologist's eyebrows rose to his forehead. Is it really the blinkers on the roof? The main thing is not to tear out the cameras, or the whole project would be a waste. At first, Harry wanted to call Harvey and warn him about the guests. But then he changed his mind. It's more interesting that way. It's more lively. Living in the fresh air in the pocket of nature gives an unprecedented boost of energy. In just 3 hours, Harvey coped with a decent number of things. Chopped wood, swept the yard, washed the floors in the house, cooked breakfast. Now he heated the bathhouse and waited for the stove to heat up. Oh, it's good here, the man said. It's so good that one could die. It was May, but it could get hot in the mornings. However, Harvey liked baths even in the heat. The main thing after the steam was to dive somewhere into a cold font, or at least pour a bucket of ice water on himself. Harry didn't install a camera in the steam room or the shower room, but the former deputy still felt uncomfortable. What if there was a lens hidden somewhere? Maybe he wants to increase the views in this way. Almost every night a technician came by and rearranged the cameras. Harvey tried to say hello to him, but he didn't say anything back. Suddenly, the former deputy heard the sound of a motor. The neighboring houses were empty. Maybe the cottagers came, or an interviewer to work with another grandmother. This man was also funny. From afar waved at Harvey, but never came close. To get acquainted with the neighbors or what? The former deputy said aloud. The bathhouse had not yet warmed up enough to invite to the first steam. Harvey went out to the lot and was stunned. Right in front of the house stood a whole delegation. A man in a jacket, obviously a representative of the local government. On the right, a policeman in a crumpled tunic, filling out some papers. And on the left, quite unexpectedly, a doctor. It was clear from the white coat worn by the frowning man. "Well, hello," said the man in the jacket. By the badge with the emblem of the settlement, Harvey assumed that this is the local chairman. "Long time no see, as they say." "Never seen each other at all," objected the former deputy. "And it would be better not to see each other, by the looks of it." "Well, in '98 you didn't hire me," smiled the official. "Let me remind you or introduce myself. Billy Jack. I'm the one in charge of Cayana. You might say all of Cayana is mine." "You've got a good memory," Harvey said, yawning. "There's just one thing you've forgotten. As an elected official, I enjoy immunity with my precinct." "You're no longer an elected official," the policeman interjected sharply. "Come with us, sir. Let's get in the car, and don't make me use force. We, unlike you, serve the state." "Come with us where?" Harvey was surprised. "I'm not going anywhere. I haven't done anything." "For compulsory examination," said the frowning doctor. Jack signed the order. "You're to undergo a physical examination." The ex-deputy was about to protest, but suddenly he heard Harry's voice in his head. "Don't argue. Go on. Just don't forget your camera. A plot twist like this will be good for his ratings. Just don't get stuck in the hospital or anywhere else." "Okay, I'll just get my papers," Harvey shouted, turned around and disappeared inside the house. The policeman rushed after him, but the former deputy moved a little faster. Harvey grabbed the folder that lay in the hallway and turned around, ready to hold his defense. Hidden inside was a camera connected to Harry's network. All he had to do to turn the device on was turn one of the clasps. "Freeze," the policeman said harshly. "Are we resisting? Running away? What are you talking about? I just took the documents. Here's a whole folder." "Get in the car and don't do anything stupid," Carlo demanded, thus taking the first steps on the big internet screen, "or I'll have to get my bracelets. They're tight, you know, so they won't scratch your delicate skin." "Am I being detained?" "We prefer a different wording." The policeman adjusted his tie. "Summoned. Requested to appear for questioning. Strongly advised to come in." "What difference does it make, after all, if we're taking you to the hospital anyway?" "I don't think so." "What do you think?" Harvey asked. "What's the point of life?" "To do what I'm told and not ask questions," Carlo answered without hesitation. "So I'm still under arrest?" the ex-deputy continued. "Silence," said the policeman rudely. "Talking to you already, you know what? I'm tired. I got the folder in front of me. My job is to take you to the hospital, and there let the doctors decide whether you're healthy or not." Harvey looked at the screen of the phone. A new message in Telegram. A user with the nickname Harry sent an emoji with a thumb. The former MP smiled. There must be new actors in their show. "At least you're not going to hit me?" Harvey asked loudly, pointing his folder at Carlo. "Depends on how you behave," the cop replied. "You've gone all high and mighty up there in Washington. You think you can buy everybody. No, we can't. We're not giving you our old ladies, you hear me? By the way, what are you doing with them, huh?" Billy didn't notice the camera. He thinks he's doing the right thing because there was a voice from above. After all, he has an order, however unwritten, and he follows it. There are 1,000 old ladies in the village. What if the uninvited guest has the coronavirus? If he's tested, it'll make everyone feel better. They'll learn a little more about him. Satisfied, Billy jolted in the car as it sped down the rural dirt road. He looked in the rearview mirror at the former deputy and felt better. The person didn't look so dapper anymore. He used to be infrequently disliked on TV. Only after the story with the robed deer did he appear on the screens again, but he was hardly happy about it. "How do you like our village?" Lily asked with a smile. "Wonderful," Harvey replied. "Beautiful, clean. And the old ladies are a sight to behold." "You'll have to talk to the specialists about that." The chairman of the local government nodded toward the doctor. "Looking at your unhealthy tendencies, we immediately decided to involve medicine." "What, may I ask, is unhealthy?" Harvey was surprised. "Well, I love old ladies, I love. Besides, you were talking about the coronavirus." The policeman groaned and began to wonder if such bold statements were not forbidden by law. Billy blushed thickly. Old ladies could not leave him indifferent either. But unlike his antagonist, he would never admit it. Only the doctor in the white coat remained indifferent. He was staring out the window, not reacting to Harvey's words. The road to the outpatient clinic had been thoroughly graveled recently, so there weren't many potholes. After all, it was one of the most popular destinations in Guyana. For residents who walk or ride bicycles, a large curb was provided. However, it was not separated from the road in any way, and cars could drive on it if they wanted to. "Sign here," Carlo demanded, holding out a form. "What's this?" Harvey asked. "It's an executed arrest warrant." "Okay." The outpatient clinic must have been recently renovated. The building had been insulated and painted with decorative plaster, and the inside looked pretty decent too. As soon as Harvey was ushered into the office, the head of the settlement and the policeman vanished. The doctor gestured to a chair. "Sit down. Let me introduce myself," he said. "My name is Tony." "You know my name," the politician replied. "What, may I ask, is this play?" "We are forced laborers," the doctor said instead of answering and shrugged his shoulders. "We'll take a swab," he said. "But no one will forbid us to treat the patient well. By the way, we'll have to turn off the daddy." "What do you mean?" Harvey was surprised. "What do you mean, turn off the daddy?" "You have a camera there," the doctor explained. "I noticed it in the car. I don't need the attention. You'll be swabbed for coronavirus and you can go. But I was thinking." "About what?" the ex-parliamentarian asked. "That you would have tea with me with jam," the man said shyly. "It's not every day that outstanding people come to our village. I've read your articles. Very cleverly written, on the point. And what do you want to talk about?" "About the present," the doctor replied. "The past and the future. I'm here, believe it or not, like a fly behind glass. I keep hitting and hitting, but I can't get out." "You can have tea," Harvey nodded. The doctor's attention to his political career flattered him, but no alcohol. "I don't drink." "Are you sure?" the doctor asked. He opened the cabinet shelf, and behind it, like a battalion of soldiers, lined up a row of colorful bottles of liquor. "Or will you choose something?" "Tea and that's it," Harvey said. "There's a lot of noise in the studio." The audience was invited, not some masses for $500 a person, but a solid audience that goes only where it is really interesting. For the first time in a long time, the administrators even had the opportunity to choose guests rather than persuade any. Everyone wanted to get on the program, understandably why. The host was wiggling, rolling his eyes, talking to the staff. He was warming up. He'd spent all night watching a new show and was impressed. But then the buzzer sounded and the live show began. The presenter's face changed so rapidly, as if he had put on a mask. His movements became fast, calibrated, and precise. Like a conductor, he looked around his orchestra at the studio, where politicians, lawyers, government officials, and one priest were seated on armchairs and sofas in front of the cameras. All of them were staring intently into the lenses as if they were deciding a matter of national importance. Good evening, dear friends. This is the program Don't Be Silent, and you're with its permanent host androids. Today's topic is I'm Back, a mystery series by a former deputy settled in the countryside. And although the platform for the show is our worst competitor, we still cannot ignore this phenomenon. Let me introduce the guests of our studio. The host began to list the people who had dropped by, but named only the most prominent ones. He corrected his tie and defiantly took a bottle with the sponsor's drink in his hands. He took a symbolic sip and rolled his eyes in pleasure. smiled again and reminded him to keep his cool during the broadcast, not to swear or insult each other. Even though that's what my program's ratings are based on, androids mentally added, "Attention to the screen," he said, and the studio launched a report on the series I'm Back, which had trended on YouTube in just a few days. The journalist, like a real movie critic, evaluated the play of actors, plot, and other important points. He did not ignore the natural scenery of a beautiful village with a rich history. He highlighted the suspicious love of the deputy for grandmothers, his desire and opportunity to spend a lot of time alone with them. Summarizing, he asked a question that interested many viewers. The United States is great, but there is not enough attention for everyone. Only one thing remains unclear. What does Harvey, who shamefully lost his parliamentary mandate, do with our sweet grandmothers? Is it not unnatural and illegal? The hero of the series himself refused to comment. "Objection!" shouted someone, a sitting member of parliament, and at the same time carried Harvey. "Don't get it wrong. There was no loss of mandate. There was a voluntary resignation. So let's give the floor to our first guest," Android said, ignoring the rejoinder. "This is the psychologist-sexologist, a doctor with great experience, Leslie Dolzhinskaya. Leslie, listen to your opinion about our story." The woman laid out a substantial sum to get on television and appear on screens across the country. She hoped to recoup her investment within the first month of airing. "The first thing to consider is the age of our protagonist," said the middle-aged woman, fixing her hair, which looked more like a hornet's nest. "No, Ander, we're not talking about you. Harvey is well into his 40s, but as we see in the public record, no children, no wife. Why the attraction to old ladies? Of course, I'm not at liberty to diagnose him in absentia, but psychology describes this deviation gerontophilia in detail. Are we talking about a deviation from the norm or an individual preference?" Android clarified, demonstrating his extensive knowledge of psychology. "Scientists think we're talking about individual preference, but I call it an aberration," Leslie said, nodding. "Objection!" shouted again. "Unlike the psychologist, it wasn't the psychologist who was paying, it was him. You diagnosed without even seeing the person. How dare you? Are you sure that's what he's doing to old ladies? We must draft a new law and license all psychologists." "All you want to do is license them," Leslie retorted, as if there was nothing else to do but prohibit and not allow. And the hall began to rumble and noise. The guests shouted and interrupted each other, guided by the invisible hand of an experienced presenter. The bishop prayed loudly, calling for peace and harmony. The two men, Harvey's supporter and Harvey's opponent when he was a deputy, clashed, having exhausted their arguments. They quickly got into a firm clinch. They had to be separated by other guests. It was thanks to such bickering that the program's ratings grew, and it remained on the air in primetime for many years. When the noise and ruckus reached its peak and the situation started to get out of control, the host decided to act. The gong sounded, signaling the end of part one. "So we have a special guest on the air, who is going to set the record straight," said Androids, winking at the camera. "Don't ask how we managed to convince him to come on the program. A man named Harry is the creator of the show and also its producer. Let's hear it." There was a round of applause. For the broadcast, the political technologist got rid of his beard and made a stylish hairdo. He wore an expensive suit and solid-rimmed glasses. The man walked past the guests with a winning gait, greeted the presenters by the hand, and sat down on a chair. "Thanks for having me on," he said. "I love your show." "Thank you. So Harry, are you ready to tell us what the main character, your personal friend and associate, is doing in the village? And most importantly, what does he do alone with his grandmothers?" "Before we answer that question," Harry said, "I'd like each person in this studio to listen to themselves. We've long noticed that the attitude toward the elderly in the U.S. is condescending, at best, and yet they are almost a quarter of the population. And yet, androids cut him off. You don't watch his show but think about global issues. What's going on? With the grandmothers?" "I'm ready to demonstrate the video," Harry replied. "I'm sure it will make most of the guests in this studio ashamed." "We're ready." Androids made a decision for everyone. He would deal with the shame and get over it somehow. But what about curiosity? How great it is to socialize with new people without alcohol. The wonderful conversation with the doctor left no headache. They drank 2 cups of tea each and parted satisfied. But as soon as Harvey crossed the threshold of his house, the phone rang. Harvey, he heard a familiar voice in the receiver. It was Ariana. Have you been released yet? Yes, answered the former deputy. What's more, I wasn't even detained. Listen, son, said Ariana. My grandmothers and I have been talking. It's bad that you live like this alone. Such a precious man and alone. It's not good, it's not Christian. Don't worry, the former deputy answered. I'm fine alone, Ariana. No, Mel, the grandmother began to argue. There is a good woman in our village. What kind of woman? A girl, if you think about it. Young, just starting to live. What is this? Harvey thought with horror. A provocation? A setup? Has the competition already infiltrated here? And how to behave in such a delicate situation? Thank you, Harvey replied. But I must decline this tempting offer. We've already sent her. Ariana said. It's her day off today. She's working on our farm as a driver. A driver? The former deputy asked again. Yes, but it's just a downtime, shouted the grandmother. The car broke down. There's no one to fix it. She will not lie under it, really. He wanted to say that it wasn't a woman's profession, but he kept silent. After all, it's not from a good life that people do things that are hard and even harmful to them. Imagination painted a fragile girl who bravely climbs into a huge ZIL or GAZ and tries to revive it, but without success. Yeah, Ariana replied. Don't kick her out, Harvey. Just take her for a walk around the village. See if she's here yet or not. Harvey looked out of the window. A tall woman, bloody and milky, stood at the gate, shyly shuffling from foot to foot. From the back, it was impossible to make out her age. Certainly not his target audience. But why not take a walk? After all, he had plenty of free time in the village. Harvey decided to call Harry to ask for advice, but the political technologist didn't pick up the phone. All right, thought the former MP. We can go for a walk. The main thing is not to drink tea, or I can't look at him anymore. The woman looked at him with interest. She was smiling with the ingenuous smile that ladies try on themselves to pretend to be simpletons. Harvey decided to be polite too. Hello, he said. Are you expecting me? Oh, good afternoon, she said. My name's Cindy. What are these, chickens? This one's okay, but the other one's lame. I'd better use it for soup. You like soup? They spent the rest of the day walking around the village, eating ice cream, watching the sunset. Cindy's house, as it turned out, was only about 200 feet away in a straight line. It had been a long time since Harvey had socialized with an ordinary woman. He was surrounded by models, business ladies, bankers, and just plain aspiring ladies. Having cut a few circles around the village, approaching the house of a new acquaintance, they stopped. Maybe you'd like me to do the same. Cindy smiled. Like your grandmother's. Well, she expected Harvey to blush or be embarrassed. But no, he was all glowing. It was as if he'd been waiting for word to get around the village about his interest in old ladies. He got all flush. Why not? He answered, but not today. Today, I'm already tired. Maybe tomorrow. He was quite handsome, and she, in her 35 years, was also very pretty. Only there was an unspoken sadness in her eyes. Harvey looked into them and saw the longing of Shash. Cindy had waited all her life for a man, not a prince, but just a loving man who could listen and hear. Yet she enjoyed every moment and smiled. You can only see the longing if you look well into the soul. I had such a good time, said the former deputy, seeing Tatiana off. We had an interesting conversation. So maybe we'll visit. The woman asked hopefully. Will you come in? Harvey felt homesick. It was not only her youth, beauty, and charm. After all, he was not here to rest or even kill time. Harvey was working, and his political technician was realizing an ambitious experiment. He's 47 years old after all. There's hardly any time to swing. Not this time, he sighed. Maybe next time. Suit yourself, Cindy replied with a smile. Harvey knew right away that the woman wasn't offended. She was the kind of person who knew how to be happy. There was nothing special about it, but that was what was attractive about her. This woman was easy to talk to. He didn't notice how the day flew by. Saying goodbye, she said, "Come and see me again." 2 weeks in the village helped the politician to completely reboot. Or was it the complete abstinence from alcohol? Now he woke up at dawn, chopped wood, went for walks, enjoyed life. Things were getting farther and farther away. It was hard to make himself hustle. After all, what was the point of life inside the race if it was no longer enjoyable? To distract himself from such thoughts, the former MP decided to talk to someone who continues to hustle and conquer the top. "How is the process going?" asked Harvey, contacting Harry on Telegram. "It's going briskly," the political strategist replied. "We have hit, as they say, from all guns. I won't list them." "Did the old ladies tire you?" "Well, so." Actually, Harvey was embarrassed to admit that he really liked grandmothers. In their person, he found great listeners and interlocutors. He was amazed at himself, how quickly he switched from unnecessary Moscow luxury to unpretentious rural life. "Look, Harvey," Harry said, "when you go to chop wood in the morning, make a roar as if you were fighting a mammoth. And more life, more life." "What, not enough views?" the former deputy asked incredulously. "We need more viral videos." Chop political technologist, "Soon you'll have walkers coming to you. They will look for a bunker under the old house, servants. It is necessary that they all sign there in their own worthlessness." "All right, I don't have time for this. I've got chickens to feed." One of the old ladies gave him 2 hens so Harvey could eat fresh eggs every morning. Actually, it was a lot of work with those birds. Now the morning began not only with chopping wood, but also with grain. Yesterday, he had bought a kilogram of wheat and corn flakes at the village store. The seller assured him that it would be enough for a week. "Chicky, chicky, chicky," Harvey said, calling his hens. One he named Ryaba and the other Chickadee. His back was aching, as if it needed an honorable rest. After all, Harvey had been too zealous in cutting wood yesterday. After all, he wasn't 20 years old anymore. He had to be careful. If he'd been in Washington at his summer house, he could have called a doctor. He would have examined, massaged, relieved the pain. But here in Cajun, he had to do it on his own. He rubbed some ointment on his lower back and then made a strong bandage. It felt better. Suddenly, he remembered that his new acquaintance had bragged to him yesterday that she had graduated as a nurse. It must be better if she rubbed the ointment on his back, especially since she herself had hinted at visitors yesterday. "Cindy, hi," Harvey said after calling her. "Are you at work or on vacation?" "Day off," the girl answered. "Why?" "My back is killing me. Can you give me a hand?" As Harvey was going to Cindy's house and his aching lower back, he searched for a suitable gift. After all, it's awkward to visit a woman without a present. Finally, he found an Indian mirror among the memorabilia, a gift from a colleague in Asia. "It's beautiful." "Cindy, good afternoon," said the deputy, crossing the threshold. "Do you know that tomorrow I'll be seeing 10 old ladies at once?" Their meetings became regular, and Harvey's lower back no longer bothered him. Selena had been in charge of the name library for many years, almost since the death of the chief, to whom it owed its name. During that time, the interest in books had had its heyday and its oblivion. Now the fashion for reading was returning, and when Harvey suggested holding readings for grandmothers, she was even confused. "Wasn't that forbidden?" "You see," he explained, "I've been reading books for 2 weeks now at the request of our villagers. It started spontaneously. We were talking to Ariana, and I noticed Marquet's 100 Years of Solitude. I picked it up and started reading it out loud. She really liked it. She got all fired up. The other one asked me to read her Pounds of Dough. You know that novel by Orwell?" Selena said yes, and now she was setting up the chairs. The guests were about to start arriving, and they weren't old enough. What would Harvey be reading tonight? The old librarian thought languidly of the evening ahead. More than an hour before it was to begin, old ladies began to come in. "Was I late?" one of them asked, putting a dish on the table. "Here, I baked a pie. Let Harvey have one afterward." Such a man," echoed the other. "He's so thoughtful, so attentive." "I'm the one who said, 'Read for everyone,'" shouted Katie. "And me for that. Can you imagine?" Soon the library was filled with grandmothers talking about everything in the world. They were making so much noise that Selena could hardly suppress the urge to shush her. Fortunately, today was a special day. Today was the day God himself had commanded the library to be filled with voices, laughter, and life. At 5 to 6, Harvey walked into the library. He was wearing a fine jacket and tie. A cameraman followed him, filming everything that was going on. The politician paid no attention to him. The old lady started clapping, but the former deputy was not embarrassed. He waved his hand, both greeting and offering to sit down. Took out of his briefcase a tome and began. "What have I decided to read today?" said Harvey. "The immortal classics. Here, Gogol's The Inspector. Do you approve?" "What a mess," the successor said. "No wonder you screwed up the internet too." "If you don't want to listen, I won't tell you anything," the former official replied resentfully. "It's not for you to judge me." Offense choked the former head of the administration doubly from the fact that he simply carried out the order of the big bosses, albeit in his own way. How could he know that his every move, every word is written by cameras? One could have guessed. In this situation, the dismissal of the negligent official who showed excessive zeal suited everyone. Except for him, the official, who was left without a job. Where can he go now? He doesn't know much about anything, only to pretend to be active and to organize purchases. He was taken out of his sad thoughts by a phone call. An unknown subscriber in Telegram offered to talk to him. "Change your mind," still called to Washington. Running out into the corridor, the former head of the settlement picked up the phone. "Jack speaking." "Billy," he heard a steely voice in the receiver. "I'm so sorry for your loss. It's not nice to be the shooter." "Thank you," the former head replied. "Who are you?" "I have my reasons for confidentiality. Let's not waste any time. I called to offer to get even. You have an excellent chance for revenge. And make some money." "Revenge on whom?" the former head of the settlement asked fearfully. "I have no enemies." "One ex-deputy," said the voice. "I'll give you 300,000. Doubt seized Billy. 300,000 in his situation, it's decent money. But what if he had to do something illegal? Or he might get another shot at fame, but not the fame he dreamed of. "I don't know," he admitted. "After what happened to me, I'm down." "Depends on what you're waiting for." "We're waiting for a picture," the voice replied. "A picture that will show our hero from the other side. You can keep the camera as a souvenir." Billy brightened. He knew exactly where Harvey spent his evenings, Carlo had told him. "I've got an idea," Billy said. "But I'm so afraid." "Don't be afraid," said a voice. "Wait for the courier. He'll arrive in a couple hours and give you a package. I hope for a fruitful cooperation." Billy went into his former office and found his successor rehearsing how he was going to scold his subordinates. "And I said that you don't know the manual," he shouted to his imaginary victim, and immediately became embarrassed when he looked at his predecessor. "Ouch." "Don't be shy," said Billy. "The main thing is that no one filmed it and put it on the internet, or at least not on a popular channel." His head was pounding again, though Harvey hadn't touched a bottle of liquor in a long time. He woke up to a vibration. His phone, left to charge overnight, was going crazy. Missed calls were everywhere, in Viber, Telegram, WhatsApp. Now the political technologist was trying to reach him on a regular connection. Harvey took the call. "What have you done?" shouted into the phone Harry instead of greeting. "What is this love line in our flawless series?" There was real pain in his voice. The former deputy remembered yesterday, or rather the night before, how he'd come to Cindy's house for no reason, no purpose. How they hugged, and suddenly a flash cut through the darkness. "I should have known it was more than that. I should have called Harry right away." "Yesterday was a big day," Harvey said. "Did you see the incredible number of old ladies I work with?" "Do you think they'd appreciate a night out?" Harry asked. All of it, all of their hard-earned money." "Is it impossible to love politics?" the former deputy asked defiantly. "I've fallen in love." "What now? Should I hang myself?" Harry was frantically thinking and looking for a way out. He had envisioned everything, but not the human factor, so the dirt could certainly bring down the ratings, or use it to his advantage. He needed an original move, like in chess, to completely turn the game around, a move that his interlocutor had already thought of. "You understand, Harvey," pleaded the political technologist. "As soon as you choose one woman, the rest will immediately lose interest. We'll never win that way. But I've got an idea that'll turn the game around. I'll tell you about it." "No," Harvey said. "No. To hell with winning. I'm out of the game, sorry." "What?" Harry asked, disbelieving his ears. "After all we've accomplished? After these ratings with no budget, it's not suicide, it's much worse. I'm out of here, the former MP said. Send me an estimate, I'll pay for it. I have a penny. How much you spent? Tell me every last dime, so you don't hold a grudge against me. Don't you understand? The political technologist shouted. It's not about money. Money is just a tool. I'm not kidding, Harvey said. All right, that's enough. I'm staying here in Guyana. Over and out. He had already realized that he could win the biggest victory of his life, if not today, then tomorrow. It was as if Harvey was filled with energy and the will to act. He took out his cell phone and dialed a familiar number. Did you read the news? He said. That's right, don't read it. And don't go to work today. I'm already running to you, do you hear? Wait for me. At 35, Cindy had given up hope of finding a fiancé. And Harvey, of course, was the real deal. Strong, handsome, interesting. And most importantly, he didn't smoke or drink. All her friends who got married and moved to other cities complained about their husbands. The main complaint is no love, not even respect and understanding. They made Harvey look perfect. Cindy, he shouted as he ran in. They took a picture of you and me together. They say our picture is all over the internet. Let it be, the woman said. If only there was something to be ashamed of. Good girl, he praised. I think so too. I have a proposal. I'm listening, she said, embarrassed. Let's live together, Harvey said. At your place for now, and then we'll see. My place? The woman was surprised. The house, after all. You see, what kind of? We'll fix the house, the man suggested. I can do this and that myself. I love Guyana with all my soul, or rather, not Guyana, but you. Did you really love her? She asked and blushed. She was dizzy. In just a few days, her life had turned 180 degrees. I agree. I'll do anything, Harvey. He put his arms around her again and kissed her. At this moment, the former deputy thought that in life you need very little for happiness. Love and nothing else. If you don't have love, you can't replace it with anything. Not fancy cars, not a government villa, not millions of views on the internet. And when love comes, you have to act. In his 47 years, he understood that clearly. How's this going to end, Harvey? Whispered Cindy. Why don't we just screw him? Let's get out of Cajun. We're not going anywhere, said the former assemblyman. The nature here, the sunsets. It's really nice to be here with you. Listen, I've been wanting to know for a long time. Isn't it hard for you with old ladies? She asked. No, Harvey replied. What could be better than reading to grandmothers? It's like spending time with little kids. It wasn't my idea, by the way. It was my assistant. Well, the former one. What kind of entertainment does a grandmother have in the village? TV and radio. A clever man suggested they read books. Will you read to me? Cindy asked me timidly. What about you? I will, he said and lifted his woman in his arms. Then he had to set her down carefully so as not to fall in her eyes. The whole thing made my bloody lower back ache at the worst possible moment. 2 years passed, and life in Cayenne began to beat again. Tourists came here. The village became fashionable after the resounding success of the project on YouTube. One investor bought 3 empty houses and started renting them out. Harvey himself wrote 2 books and enjoyed reading them to the public. Of course, he didn't have a lot of money, but how much money does it take to live in the country? Harvey, Cindy called him from the bedroom. Help me with Valushka. The former deputy, despite his advanced age, rushed to his girls. The role of father not only suited him, but also liked it. Daughter reminded him of a negligent subordinate, which all must be taught. But the result was pleasing. The girl grew up smiling and beautiful. Listen, he said to Cindy, if God gives us a boy, why don't we name him Harry? In honor of whom? The woman blushed. There's a man, Harvey explained. He's a good man, he understands life, but he's not quite there yet. Whatever you say, my love. Cindy smiled and hugged her husband.